they're behind.
They're behind. Let's ask people what they want to solve the problem. I just found out that I'm going to be a moderator. Thank you for that's of course we should be able to do it. But the problem which we're facing now is that we are behind schedule. So I have to ask the audience how we're going to solve that. I think, according to me, the last thing would be used to give every presentation the time they are supposed to have, 20 minutes, and then just go a little bit over the schedule. Because people is coming from all over the world to do their presentation, and I think it would be a little bit out of respect for them to limit the space. Even if there are not so many, I think we will manage. Is that all right for the audience?
And perhaps the presenters can also a little bit shorter, if possible.
If possible, we need it to the presenter.
To postpone the discussion, the question session as the free time. Okay? So I think that really matters. We'll try. And we'll make less the cooperation. Of course.
Thank you very much. Yes. And then we are ready to start with Professor Dr. Leisha Savara. We know each other from last time, and I'm looking forward to your presentation.
Okay, thank you so much for coming. And I'll try to get this done within 20 minutes, maybe 25. Lucas was out at 30, so I will do my best.
You go to the keynote, so you have 30 minutes.
I have 30 minutes. Okay. So because this is a conference that deals with science and vision, I tried to come up with something that was original. And so I came up with the idea of discussing the life and the discoveries of Dr. Jane Goodall, the famous primatologist, and how that connects with Eastern Christian theology. And so what I've done in this first part of the presentation, I'm going to give a little bit of an introduction. I'll talk about her life and discoveries. I will then talk about Eastern Christian Orthodox theology and what it teaches us about animals, and the connection between this scientist and her life and what the Orthodox Church teaches about the animal kingdom and life and salvation, and then a conclusion. So the question that I started to think about is that, are animal species capable of showing reverence of God or to God? Can they worship God? According to my tradition that I was born and raised in, the animal kingdom are co-worshipers with God. And so I wanted to know what the scientists thought, and I wanted to delve deeper into this question. So this idea of having another animal species that might be capable of true reverence remains still today unacceptable in most scientific and most theological circles. So I wanted to start off with the home that Jane Goodall. So she was born in April 19. She's 87, 88 years old now. And she came from a divorced family. And she grew up in this home with her grandmother, who was married to a pastor. He was from the Congregationalist branch of Christianity. She lived there with her mother, her sister, and her two aunties. And on the weekends, her uncle, who was a surgeon, would come and visit them. But she was basically brought up in a home that was filled with strong models of female women. It was interesting that as a little child, Jane Goodall was gifted with being a naturalist. She and her daughter Trudy would form the Alligator Club, for instance. And in this Alligator Club, they would have a small magazine that filled about nature and the anatomical drawings. She, as a little girl, and I'm saying under 8 years old, created a conservatory that contained shells and flowers. and even a human skeleton. And there she collected money, and that was donated to a local society that rescued old horses from being sold as meat, and instead took them to safe havens where they could live out their remaining lives. By the time she was 8 years old, Jane Goodall had developed an unshakable fascination with animals. She read about them and she drew stories about them. She read the famous Dr. Dolittle, a novel about a very kind doctor that developed a remarkable ability to talk and be intimate with animals by learning their languages. She also admired the Tarzan books, in which a young boy raised by apes in the jungles of Africa grows up and becomes a protector of animals. And she later wrote, and she said in her speeches, that even today when she has started traveling around the planet, I was madly in love with that Lord of the Jungle, terribly jealous of Jane. He had a lovely story. By the time that she was 8 years old, the dream of her going to Africa and studying animals and writing stories about them was already clear in her mind. When the war broke out in Europe in 1945, Jane Goodall started studying the Nazi death camps as a little girl. And here she was, she writes, I was 11 years old at the time, very impressionable and imaginative. Although the family would like to have spared me the horrifying Holocaust pictures, I had never been prevented from reading the newspapers, and they did not stop me. Those photographs had a profound impact on my life. I could not erase the images of walking skeletons with their deep sunken eyes. The things that she found out in life at a very young age is that life was full of ambiguity and contradiction, and the Holocaust settled her very deeply. But the big question she was asking was, and she still asks today, but within the context of the animal kingdom, how could people behave this way? How could anyone endure this and survive such torture? How could animals survive such torture? Throughout her school days, she spent many hours in the garden, taking up her homework into a tree called beech. And with beech, she would learn about the life of the tree swaying with the wind, strongly going close to the wonders of the green world. She also, at the age of 8, taught her mother to dream to study animals. And many people taunted her as she was a girl and said, well, how can you? You're going to get married, you're going to go and have children, and you cannot go to Africa. White people do not do that. The other important thing I wanted to know before we go on to her life is what the author wrote about her. As many adolescents will want to do, Goodall fantasized about living a saintly life and dying a martyr of her faith. She imagined traveling to the Soviet Union, which had banned all religious activity and imposed an official atheism. There she would join with the small groups of Christians and Jews who continued to meet despite the severe punishment of the government that had inflicted for engaging in religious worship. Inflamed by the stories of early Christians who met secretly in Rome after the government had outlawed, Jane now saw herself as a missionary, bringing the word of God to communist Russia. If caught, she would give up her life for faith. These religious fantasies of self-sacrifice and martyrdom were the heroic dreams of an unusually thoughtful and sensitive teenager. But they cannot be so easily dismissed, for they reveal important facets about Jane Goodall's character. While still a young girl, she had developed a selfless devotion to the weak and the powerless. She showed the determination to battle injustice, untruth, and perhaps most important, she struggled to change the world that she thought was increasingly dominated by barbarism, suffering, and evil. In addition to reading the Bible every day, Jane Goodall continued to indulge herself in the love of poetry. By the time she entered her middle teen age, she had changed in her spiritual life, and she started asking about the place and role of humanity in the world, and the questions about whether human beings had the right to dominate nature just because they had the power to do that. By the time she was 19 years old, she went to Queen's Secretarial College, so she would get a secretarial degree so she could then be a typist and earn money for her dream to go to Africa. And she also helped her aunt who lived in the country, in the house there, and grew naturally. She was a physical therapist, and Jane's empathy grew for those who were weak and disabled. So what is very important is that at the age of 22, she has an unexpected turn, and her dream of working and writing about animals in Africa comes true. She gets an invite from a friend in Kenya to please come and visit us. And she ends up going to Kenya to start her life's destiny. But all of this, as you see in Jane, she had a very close association with the animal kingdom up until the very latest, up until this day. So her dream to go to Africa was, she didn't care where she went, but she ended up working here at Gombe National Park. And she had met in Africa the very famous but controversial figure of Louis Leakey in Tanzania. Up until this time, humanity thought that the first human beings were in Asia. But Leakey had another idea. He says the first human beings actually born in East Africa. So Leakey was fascinated by the potential evolutionary link between humans and our closest relatives, the great apes. So he was looking for someone to study chimps in Tanzania to see if there was any connection between their behavior and ours. So here are Louis Leakey wanted women. He wanted women, not men, to study and observe in the jungle the chimpanzees and also the gorillas and also the orangutans. So Jane Goodall, he hired, and for 6 months he found money by the National Geographic. She was studying chimpanzees. Diane Fossey in Gorillas Myth, there's a story about her, if you've seen that. She was the one that was chosen by Leakey to study gorillas, and Ruti Galdikas, a Canadian, was the one that's chosen to study orangutans. Both Jane Goodall and Ruti Galdikas are still living. Diane Fossey was murdered in either Uganda or Rwanda because she was standing up for the rights of animal kingdom, and this was an affront to those who wanted to go in and kill the animals for their paws and ashtrays, etc. So this was the area in which she was working in the Democratic Republic of Congo and Burundi, Rwanda, all of this area here in this area where she was working was filled with war and refugees going from one country to the other. But she managed to get money to Louis Leakey to do a 6-month study on the island at Gombe National Park. So when she had first started, she was very, very courageous woman because you had all sorts of wild animals there, you had poisonous snakes there, everything, and she would go and the British government made her be with her mother Van, And here is a picture of her mother using the walkie-talkies to see if she's okay. But Jane Goodall made some unusual discoveries. So here I had Van and the walkie-talkie, and Jane was out all night with the chimps in 1960. Jane would then come back sometimes at night, and she was extremely self-disciplined and devoted to this, and would write all of her observations. Here is with the very famous picture of David Gravedier, which is a chimp that showed that it's not only humans, because at that time they believed only humans used tools. And here he had taken some grass and pointed it, put it into the trunk, and took out the insects to eat. And this was evidence that this animal was a tool maker. It was also believed in science at the time that chimps did not eat meat, that they were vegetarian. So she made a discovery that they were meat eaters. If you take a look at these pictures in her early days, and we have to remember this is not a dog, this is a wild animal, and she produced a certain ambience within herself that was able to get so close to her subjects there. So Jane was with David Greybeard, the first chimpanzee to lose the fear of Jane and to introduce Jane to the forest world. So these are some unusual pictures of her at her early times there, and she was here grooming. Grooming is a way that you connect with the animal. And as we shall see, that what is prominent in Eastern and Western churches, that the saints, the holy people, were able to not only connect and do good with the people, but they were able to connect and to have intimacy in close to wild animals. Later on, this National Geographic comes out and starts taking pictures of this. This is Hugo van Lovrik. And through the publishing of the National Geographic and some of these pictures, which are taken through, for the National Geographic, she is showing to the world that the animals have emotional responses. They have personalities. They have minds. They teach their young culture. They are teaching them how to hunt here. Here was a very famous chimp Flo who died in 1972. And she records that the child of Flo, Flint, had died of grief that the mother had died. So prior to this, the people thought, this is crazy, you're a crazy woman to think that animals have emotional feelings. Anyone who owns a dog knows that it's not true. She records that the emotional responses were, and she had pictures to show, they hugged, they kissed, they had calls and gestures and postures, they laughed, they played, they observed her drinking coffee. They had a desire to play. They were socially developed human beings with, animals with complex social relations. And they could be close with those of other species, bamboozled with human beings. Here, Figan, another famous chimp, was trying to persuade her to play. And here you have the Flint learning how to get the termites, and this was how they learned the different tool-using cultures of the community. Gremlin was another one, famous chimp. She wrote about holding her small sleeping baby. She said she was a wonderful mother, gentle, affectionate, and playful. Mother and daughter feed on young leaves. Baboons and chimps were playing together for playtime. All these new discoveries, she was discovering how they go up into the trees there and have an evening meal, and then they would start their last day and then build their nest. So Jane had achieved a remarkable intimacy with a group of wild animals. Here she is as a young woman on National Geographic in 1965. and it was about her first article she wrote was My Life Among the Chimpanzees. She went on to write many, many books. In the Shadow of Man, her first book was published in 1971, and would write books about Africa in My Blood or Harvest for Hope. And it goes on and on about her discoveries and her closeness. What has happened with Jane Goodall was that she has traveled over the world. In 1984, she goes to a conference and discovers that the habitat is being destroyed by these chimps. And so since 1984, up until the pandemic, she was traveling 300 days a year, talking about what's happening to the animal kingdom, what's happening during deforestation, what is happening to the planet. And she has received so many degrees, and she is the United Nations Messenger for Peace. And she started the Roots and Shoots program, in which young people across the planet in over 100 countries are taught how to care. You choose a care for human beings, care for the planet, or care for animals. And she also started the Jane Goodall Institute, which is in over 100 countries, with animals talks are one of the amazing videos that she makes. And she is not only an advocate for, just chimps, but for all animals. So in summary, I just wanted to say that she's known for two main discoveries, that chimps ate meat and they made tuo. Leakey famously declared, now we would redefine tuo or redefine the man or accept chimpanzees as humans. And she also said that animals have personalities, minds, and emotions, even though the colleagues at Cambridge University told her she could not discuss these qualities. She also believed that chimpanzees had spiritual capacities and the ability to worship God, something that the Eastern Church knew right at the beginning of its time. So she continues to advocate on behalf of captive and wild chimps and all animals. Her Roots and Shoots program has started in Tanzania and stretches across the globe. And she's received many international awards and is a renowned world conservationist. This next part of the Eastern Church, I'm going to talk about what the Eastern Church talks about, the biblical teaching about the animal kingdom, what the Bible says, the patristic teachings, the early church fathers, what they said about the animal kingdom, dualism and the chain of being, which hit hard in the Western world, current Eastern Christian teaching about animals. So if we look back into the book of Job, for instance, in Job 12:7-9, Job invites his friends to seek truth from beyond their prized philosophy. And he says, but ask the beasts, and they will teach you. The birds of the air, and they will tell you, or the plants of the earth, and they will teach you, and the fish of the sea will declare to you. Who among all these does not know that the hand of the Lord has done this? Thus the Bible, as interpreted by the earliest writers, would indicate clearly that the non-human community has both instrumental value and inherent value. Such a view in patristic teachings of the animal world as sensitive, instinctive reflection of God's creation and God's love is firmly based on the Bible. When we look in the book of Revelation, which the Orthodox Church really loves, it's the unveiling. It's not something scary, it's the unveiling of the kingdom of love. And I hear every creature in heaven, or it tells us that all creatures participate in worship. And I hear every creature in heaven and on earth and under the earth and in the sea and all therein saying, to him who sits upon the throne and to the Lamb be blessing and honor and glory and might forever and ever. The prophet Agor speaks of the wisdom of ants, badgers, locusts, and lizards in Proverbs 30:27-24-27. So according to the earliest writings in Christianity, dating well before the split in East and West in Christianity, animals have both emotions and intelligence. As both St. Gregory Nyanza and St. Ephrem Syrian explain, such a view of animals as sentient beings as evidenced in Romans 8:22-23. All things cry out to you, those which speak, those which cannot think, though for those in one longing, one yearning, that all things have for you. If we look at St. Athanasius in the 3rd century and 4th, he teaches us that no part of creation is left void of him. He has filled all things everywhere. And St. Irenaeus, not quite sure when he was born, still highly regarded in both Eastern and Western churches, saw in animals a profound mental intuition and perception given by God. Likewise, St. Basil the Great articulated the following central themes in all his writings. The creaturely fellowship based on the common origin from God of all creatures, opposition to injustice and all wrong, the recognition of the suffering of fellow creatures, and the rejection of a wholly instrumentalist view of animals in favor of the recognition that they also live for God. This Platonic dualism and chain of being was found in all. Metropolitan John Zulus states that there is a strong negative influence of this dualism found in the Eastern Church, but it is also found very strongly in the West via Augustine and via Theophius. Because of this, theologians and philosophers like Aquinas, Kant, and Descartes denied animals any intrinsic value, justice, and mercy, and importantly denied that animals had the capacity to feel pain. And Western thinking thus adopted a strong hierarchical view of all creation, known as the chain of being, which ranked animals well below humans and made it natural to view the non-human world as subordinate to human beings. So I'm just going to skip the current teachings because I'm running out of time here. But just to say, to sum up, the current teaching is that animals are holy, and therefore we may treat animals, the way we treat it is directly relevant to our living a Christian life. And that is that we have a pastoral responsibility towards living creatures, domestic and wild, that God has given to us in our companions. Also this point that we Christians and then Eastern Christians would have explained this delicate equilibrium of all creatures from the book of nature. We have a saying that our first Bible was nature, and the second Bible, Revelation, which was the written word of God. Pope Francis says that now science is reading the book of nature and is arriving at similar conclusions that the church has always had, that many species have language, intelligence, rational thought, self-awareness, creativity, use of tools, loving family units, and the capacity to feel physical pain and experience psychological suffering. In essence, any difference is a matter of degree rather than kind. So I just wanted to talk about the unplanned connection. The discoveries of Jane Goodall concludes that animals are more like us than previously anticipated. They are sentient beings with spiritual capacities. The line separating humankind and animals is becoming more blurry every day. The one thing we have that makes us different from other creatures is this sophisticated spoken language. We can tell children about things that aren't there. We can talk about the distant past and plan for the distant future, discuss ideas. The ancient church, Eastern Christianity particularly saw the human being as not isolated from the rest of creation, but his very nature, he is bound up by the whole of the universe. So the human being is seen as a part of the tapestry of life, and we humans are bound to God and to one another in a cosmic covenant that also includes all the other living creatures on the face of the planet. As it says in Hosea and Genesis, I will make for you a covenant on that day with the beasts of the field, the birds of the air, and the creeping things of the ground. She said that animals and humans in the animal kingdom worship God in their own ways. The church has always believed they worship God, but this is her little video that I'll show that shows the animals worshiping and her discovery that she talks about. Yeah, so well, after this, her thing, and then it's so one last comment, and that is this, that there are two windows to truth. You have the scientific view that tells us the reality insofar as is measurable, identifiable, quantifiable. They understand nature quantifiably and through calculation. Anything invisible beyond that which we cannot infer logically and conclusively, science cannot deal with. So the scientific view, by and large, is the worldview that overshadows the religious point of view. But religion deals with the vertical dimension, the world of values, of worth, of importance, of existence, of God. And many people believe that religion and science are incompatible, yet you see in this presentation that science and religion are neither opposed, but rather interrelated and complementary ways to approach life. There are two ways to understand the world around us. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Doctor, for a very, very interesting presentation, which are great creative questions. I look forward to see this in art. I think we will just continue with our question because we have a schedule. If you have some questions, please note it so we don't get it too close to the Dr. Glacia afterwards. The next presentation, which is going for 20 minutes each, that's Professor Claire Wolfreich, German pronunciation. So I think you have to pronounce the name yourself. Looking forward to hearing
So I knew it was going to be challenging to do the paper area tour, but I hope it's my paper is entitled Sabbath Theology and Practice Implications for Ecological Spirituality. And the question I was asking myself as I began was, in an era of ecological crisis, how do we mine the wisdom of religious traditions or formative practices that could be shared across traditions? What theological visions and principles inform ways of life that honor and steward creation? So my paper draws upon Sabbath theology and practice as important to ecological spirituality, cultivating a capacity to see the created world and to resist consumerism and oppressive work. So a little background, for about 20 years, I've taught a course called Sabbath Theology and Practice at Boston University School of Theology. And this is for master's and doctoral students preparing for religious leadership and teaching careers. So I've seen this potential for rich ecumenical and interfaith study of Sabbath, especially across Jewish and Christian communities. I've had some really interesting beginning conversations with my Muslim colleagues here about whether this can be a conversation that would be extended to Islam. And I know that there are some different perspectives there, so I just want to name that, because I think that's an important area as well. But I have seen in my work that Sabbath, the theology and the practice, is something that is clearly speaking to a contemporary longing for renewal and connectivity and understanding what work means in our world today, especially in light of the burnout, the great resignation, the trauma of the past pandemic years. There's much that could be said on this topic, but in this space, I'll name 3 points. And in doing so, I'll draw upon classic Jewish and Christian theologies of Sabbath, especially the writing of Abraham Joshua Heschel, John Paul II, Jürgen Moltmann, and Walter Brueggemann. First, the one I want to emphasize is that, and because I find this maybe the least well known, and that is that I think Sabbath can be understood as a contemplative practice, Sabbath keeping, and contemplative here in the sense of seeing or attention. Sabbath cultivates attention to the natural world and recognition of its goodness and connectedness. I'm going to draw from the Catholic tradition, that's my tradition, on this point. In his apostolic letter, Dies Domini, Day of the Lord, John Paul II recounts Genesis 1 story. On the seventh day, God rests, not out of fatigue, but in joyful contemplation of what has been made. And here's a quote from that letter, the day of the Lord. It would be banal to interpret God's rest as a kind of divine inactivity. By its nature, the creative act which founds the world is unceasing, and God is always at work. The divine rest of the seventh day does not allude to an inactive God, but it emphasizes the fullness of what has been accomplished. It speaks of God's lingering before the very good work which God's hand has wrought, in order to cast upon it a gaze full of joyous delight. This is a contemplative gaze, which does not look to new accomplishments, but enjoys the beauty of what already has been achieved. And that's the end of the passage I'm reading. You can see here that Sabbath is not only about not working, that's a common understanding of Sabbath is when we don't work, but rather it's a contemplative practice of joyful, unrushed attention, a lingering, a delighted seeing, imitating a God who delights in the form of creation. So I want to underscore that close relationship between Sabbath practice and contemplation. And for those of you who teach religious education or interested in formation of youth, I think that's a really important point to think about, is how do we cultivate attention? How do we help develop practices of unrushed, lingering, delighted seeing? Second, Sabbath theology and practice underscores that our relationship to the created world is one of stewardship and relationship, not instrumental use, control, and abuse. As Heschel so poetically writes in his classic, The Sabbath, the seventh day is a pause from ceaseless technological manipulation of the created world. Indeed, Sabbath insists upon rest for the land and all creatures. And Protestant theologian Moltmann notes that Leviticus 25:1-7 provides what he calls an ecological justification for the Sabbath year, a fallow seventh year when the land rests. He describes the land as actually celebrating on the seventh year. Sabbath then is a reclaiming of a deeper identity, that is, who are we as created beings? Our connectedness, our relationship to the world around us, our recognition of its giftedness, not our own control of it. Third, Sabbath resists overwork and oppressive work structures. So there is an ethic, there's an economic ethic that is part of any Sabbath theology. Heschel describes this as an exodus from tension. There's a liberative dimension of Sabbath. And Bass describes this as a no to slavery. Any theology of work depends on a theology of Sabbath. The dignity of work means that we can stop working. If we couldn't stop working, we're slaves. So there's this, Sabbath is that margin of freedom, signaling that while work is good and it can involve toil or labor, still human beings are not created for dehumanizing work. Now, while these fundamental aspects of Sabbath are shared across Jewish and Christian traditions, it should be noted that there is a wide diversity within religious traditions regarding how to actually practice Sabbath keeping. For example, Jewish denominations differ on the question of whether driving a car or using a cell phone is permissible on Shabbat. Within Christianity, Seventh-day Adventists observe the Sabbath on Saturday, while many other Christian groups have kind of collapsed Sunday worship and Sabbath, seeing Sunday worship as a new form of Sabbath keeping. So ecumenical and interfaith study of Sabbath has a great deal of potential to enrich ecological work, but it has to be able to name and discuss these internal diversities of practice while building bridges around common visions. Moreover, while these aspects of Sabbath theology are very important, I'm a practical theologian, so part of my own work has been to look at sort of practical impediments and questions of access to Sabbath. Not everyone has equitable access to this practice. So how do gender and class, for example, shape access to Sabbath? What does it mean if you are a woman with young children? Does work stop? Where's the contemplative moment within that life? What do we make of time poverty? There's a whole literature on. You can also ask, what does it mean to bring a contemplative gaze to nature in communities with environmental destruction? What does Sabbath mean for people who are retired or ill in hospital? These kind of contextual questions are important for religious communities and religious organizations like the World Council of Churches to address. So I think that Sabbath is best understood not only as an individual practice, but also as a communal and a structural commitment. Part of our work as environmental ethicists and theologians is to analyze and respond to impediments to Sabbath practice, and to creatively reimagine ways to practice Sabbath keeping in contemporary context and life stages. This enables the theoretical power of Sabbath to take root in the formation of human communities in relationship to the natural world. As Brueggemann asserts, the celebration of Sabbath is an act of both resistance and alternative. I want to close with a poem by Wendell Berry. I don't know if you know Wendell Berry, but he has a beautiful collection of Sabbath poems. He often found Sabbath in the woods and the streams around his home, where he would walk on Sunday mornings. He said if it was raining out, he'd go to church. If it was beautiful out, he'd go to the woods. That was his Sabbath practice. And he wrote, the idea of the Sabbath gains in meaning as it is brought out of doors and into a place where nature's principles of self-sustaining wholeness and health are still evident. So this is a 1979 poem. I go among trees and sit still. All my stirring becomes quiet around me like circles on water. My tasks lie in their places where I left them, asleep like cattle. Then what is afraid of me comes and lives a while in my sight. While what it fears in me leaves me, and the fear of me leaves it. It sings and I hear its song. After days of labor, mute in my consternations, I hear my song at last, and I sing it. As we sing, the day turns, the trees move. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor. This was excellent. As the moderator, I would really say it was even 10 minutes. So we gained 10 minutes. That means that maybe we would have some time for question at the end of the session. Really interesting, and I'm looking forward to continue the discussion about the presentation about Sabbath reality. The next presentation will be done by Dr. Linda Turner in Canada, and the title is The Black Rock Ladders, something like that.
I've changed the title. I was going to originally do two, because the Black Rock does matter. And I was going to tell everybody or show people how important the Black Rock hole was and is to a lot of people in the world today. And then I was going to, after I showed examples of how important it is, I was going to do another presentation on carbon capture, storage, and utilization. This helps the hard-to-abate industries such as coal and petroleum, oil and gas, and natural gas, as well as fossil fuel, to get to net zero. And that is what the presentation today is. It's called carbon capture, storage, and utilization. And the little bit of map program, everybody else has Peter. Fit to hers. Okay. So I am going to see if I can fit and we want to play on this iPad. So working now? How did we do this? It's working. Is it my butt? The black rock we call coal is a gift of God. It is almost pure carbon, and carbon is the building block of all life. The problem is we have too much carbon in our atmosphere. In today's presentation, Carbon Capture, Storage, and Utilization, I will present 3 videos that explain how carbon capture is being used to create a carbon loop to reduce, reuse, and recycle carbon, as well as industrial and agricultural waste.
The challenge of the fertilizer is the fact that we have a very carbon-intensive technology, which is vital. But also, we know globally that we are behind them, and we need to catch up fast. Fertilizer production globally, broadly said, really they are using processes that are 70 years old, non-organic. We need to reduce emissions. CCS technology captures carbon dioxide and other waste streams and either stores the captured material or converts it into resources like fertilizer or plastics. Environment quite value. Waste is only a resource in the wrong place. That is the core tenet of what we do. I'm Arthur Schlersky, Chief Executive of CCM Technologies. Well, we have a fairly strange origin. In fact, Professor Peter Hammond and I were parents at the same school. My background is finance, his is a chemical engineer, and it was the combination of those two skill sets that founded the company back in 2011. When Peter and I founded the company, his intellectual property, which he's been developing over 25 years, is around CO2. But interestingly, he was looking at it as a solution to some of the engineering challenges that he was solving for big companies. And he turned his mind to suddenly realize that actually there was a way of capturing the CO2, the devil in carbon, and actually using that for a profitable and sensible method.
It's going to be better, it's going to be as easy to use, and it's going to be cheaper. And we appreciated that from the beginning. There was a sort of circularity developing in the whole process, and that led on very rapidly to us appreciating that if we could take materials from their end of life within waste and actually reintroduce them to the beginning of the cycle, that would be a really good process. Conventional nitrogen fertilizer production in particular is very energy intensive. In some cases, 4, 5, 6, 7 tons of emissions of CO2 for 1 ton of fertilizer. Whereas our materials are neutral in that sense. CCM is able to produce fertilizer with a zero carbon footprint or even potentially climate positive, i.e. it's removing carbon from the atmosphere. The equipment you can see behind us is relatively straightforward. It's a mixing and blending technology that is around really 3 inputs. Those are fibrous materials, any sustainable source really, so grass, straw, wood chip, or digestate cake. Ammonia, which is recovered either from food or animal waste streams. Then carbon dioxide, which is generally recovered in our case from exhaust streams. And it's those 3 components which are currently considered waste we can turn into something that's both valuable and also good for the environment. Wastewater is a very good example. At the moment, they are discharging phosphorus and ammonia into the groundwater. So rather than have them as a waste, recycle them back in and use them as core nutrients to build fertilizer with zero carbon footprint. The key part of CCM's process is to deliver the farmer a fertilizer he actually wants and needs. So it's customizable to its nutrient ingredients. We have a solution that can be put to the rice crops, the largest crop in the world, but also sub-Saharan Africa as well, where clearly soil temperature is a big issue. We're also putting both organic matter and carbon in the form of calcium carbonate into the soil. So we're bringing it back where it started from and flows in the cycle. Another piece of real tenets is to ensure the price point of the product is at least the same as the current environment, if not slightly better. Then you can actually mobilize agriculture as a massive tool in fixing the environment.
We have to create a better climate and a better world for my grandchildren and everybody else.
Agriculture is using a range of finite resources, which will run out. Our process will allow the extension of those finite resources, but also in recovering them from waste materials, it actually creates a new resource base, but without changing the fundamental ways in which you deliver agricultural production.
Carbon emission, CO2. You've heard of it, you know it warms the planet, but did you know that this dress is literally made from carbon emission? Yep, that's exactly what one biotech are doing. They're capturing carbon emissions that would normally be released into the atmosphere, warming the planet, and instead converting it into ethanol, which is then processed into one of the components used to make polyester. And voila, a dress is created. Don't think these are some soot-covered dresses better suited for chimney sweep. No, these dresses are actually quite fashionable. You might be saying, wait, how can these be made of carbon emissions? How is that even possible? Perhaps you're asking, how can I get my hands on them? Well, figure out, because that's what we're checking out in this research. How are carbon emissions being captured? Why make clothing out of them? And how does the process help in fighting climate crisis? Most importantly, we'll talk to that one group that's upcycling all of this into this. This is Jennifer Holmgren. She's the CEO of Lancetech. That's the biotech startup we mentioned earlier. And Jennifer is on a mission to reduce our global carbon emissions while making really cool products that we use every day, including these dresses. Here's Jennifer.
Our goal is to make sure that we put carbon in the circular economy
and we can use it over and over again rather than dumping it into the air or into our oceans.
And after more than 15 years of technology development and scaling up, Jennifer and Lentech believe they've got the solutions needed to lead the way into a new circular carbon economy. Using those solutions and some creative collaboration with clothing companies, they created a collection for one of retail's largest brands that incorporates fabrics made with carbon emissions.
We're making products that are identical and complete replacements. And that's actually one of the cool things, right? Because if you can do that, then people don't have to change the entire rest of your manufacturing cycle to be able to use it.
But how do carbon emissions become clothing? Good question. Let's take a look. The journey starts at a steel mill, where instead of coming out of the chimney or smokestack as greenhouse gases, the carbon emissions are captured. Once that CO2 is captured, it's pumped into a bioreactor, which has bacteria swimming all through it. And right when the carbon makes its way into the bioreactor, the bacteria eats it up instantly, converting it into ethanol. Then the ethanol is recovered and shipped to India Glycol Limited, which is a separate company in, you guessed it, India. There, it's converted into monoethylene glycol.
That's the building block of polyester.
Exactly. Thanks, Jennifer. So then that monoethylene glycol building block is processed into a low-carbon polyester yarn by a third company far eastern New Century in Taiwan. They extract polyester fibers, and the rest is really no different than making clothes not for carbon emissions. Apparel companies and their supply chains use that polyester yarn to make the final pieces of clothing. Whew, that's not. So with me, think of it like a brewery where yeast turns sugar into alcohol in steel tanks. ECOTHEE uses bacteria to ferment pollution into ethanol. The entire process from start to finish takes about 4 months to complete. Now, before we go on, let's pause for a quick lesson on today's polyester. You probably already know that polyester is basically a plastic material, and you might already know that plastic comes from petroleum. It's basically made from oil. So this process from Lentech not only captures and makes use of emissions that would normally pollute the planet, it also lowers the need to extract more fossil fuels from the ground to create new polyester. Okay, back to the show. So now you've got your dress. It's made out of captured carbon emissions. It's looking good. But can those emissions ever escape the dress and find their way into our atmosphere? Jennifer says, not likely.
So we prevented it from entering the atmosphere because now it's locked away in that dress. So unless you burn the dress or you decompose the dress in some way, which you're not going to do, that it's locked in.
How neat is that? Lentech promotes a carbon-smart circular economy where carbon is locked into the material cycle and consumers can choose where their carbon comes from.
We have the ability to give consumers a choice. Does somebody want to wear a recycled carbon dress? Wear a dress that was made from petroleum. And that's what we're trying to create, a world where people have a choice of where their carbon comes from.
Why are Lentech and clothing brands doing all this? Well, as you might have seen in recent years, the climate crisis is having major impacts on our planet. Weather events, wildfires, droughts, and heat waves, it's affecting everything from crop production, destruction of habitats, rising sea levels, the list goes on. According to the Natural Resources Defense Council, or NRDC, the average global temperature in the past 50 years has increased at the fastest rate in recorded history, all of which is a direct result of us humans emitting a lot of greenhouse gases, mostly carbon, into our atmosphere, causing the global temperature to rise. According to a 2021 report from the UN, global emissions are expected to rise 60% by 2030 compared to 2010 levels. That puts the world off track for the 45% cut emissions that climate scientists say is needed to meet the Paris Agreement's goal of limiting global warming to 1.5 degrees Celsius above pre-industrial levels. That means if we don't take immediate action, consequences will be major. Keep trapping carbon in the atmosphere, causing more devastating effects. There will be no turning back. Yes. But not only that, a report from the New England Journal of Medicine also suggests that rising global temperatures will lead to many more deaths. It could force 100 million people into extreme poverty by 2030. So what can be done? Well, to start, Lentech has a goal of the next couple of years to prevent 1 million tons of CO2 from being emitted. Instead, turning it into products. That's like taking over 197,000 passenger vehicles off the road for 1 year. So far, the company has produced over 24 million gallons of low carbon intensity ethanol, and has prevented 120,000 tons of CO2 from being emitted into the atmosphere. They hope that someday, everything that is used and bought will come from recycled carbon, not fresh fossil carbon.
I would like people to understand is that all these things are possible. That we need to just keep working on technology, scaling technology, and that we need partners like Zara to get support from consumers so that they continue to try to make a change.
The company hopes to create a future refinery and convert the ethanol in one location instead of shipping it out across the world, further cutting down on their own emissions. They also aren't stopping at clothing. They plan to produce all sorts of products using their tech. everything from bottles, aviation fuel, shoes, and rubber tires. So that's about it. Carbon emissions are captured and converted into ethanol through fermentation, which is then converted into low carbon monoethylene glycol and turned into a low carbon yarn, which is then used to make fabric. All of this helps limit the release of carbon into our atmosphere. Cutting back is super important to offset global warming. So, what are your thoughts on this emerging tech? When you wear clothing made out of CO2, how else are you helping stop the climate crisis? Let us know in the comments below.
Elon Musk is offering $100 million to teams that can figure out the best solutions to carbon removal technology. I want to look into what it is, how it can help the world, and there are some other uses that may be caught attention, so I can answer why Elon Musk is actually obsessed with carbon capture.
So the logical world makes sense in to make that call.
This is the chance that you get for saving money and to The competition is in partnership with XPRIZE, which is an organisation that runs competitions to encourage technological development to benefit humanity across a range of areas. But this is the biggest prize that they've ever offered, so it's got to be something that they think is vital, which really it is. We release about 45 gigatons of CO2 into the atmosphere every year. So to keep global temperature rise below 2 degrees Celsius, we're going to need to cut down on emissions. But we're also going to need to actively remove gigatons of CO2 from the atmosphere and store it away as part of the solution. The competition is open to any ideas to suck up CO2, but I just want to focus on one specific type: direct air capture, or DAC. Most DAC tech uses huge fans that suck in air over some type of filter, which captures the CO2 using chemical reactions. It's then piped down into places like underground caverns and stored for long periods of time, taking it out of the planet's carbon cycle. Huge arrays of these things can be stacked, so in theory, it could be scaled up to take out gigatons of CO2 each year, which could make a pretty good dent in our yearly emissions. Currently, there's only a handful of DAC projects around the world. A company called Climeworks is actually building the biggest ever right now in Iceland. It's called Orca, and it's going to be able to suck up around 4,000 tons of CO2 each year. But at this point, you might be hearing all this, and you might be thinking, wait, can't we just plant trees? Trees suck up CO2 out of the atmosphere, and they use it to make more trees. So it's a fair question. But even though some carbon removal ideas do use trees to capture carbon, and even though if you've been watching any of my previous videos, you know that I should be planting as many trees and saving as many trees as possible, these DAC technologies are simply just able to take out way more CO2 than trees are in the same amount of space. The company called Climate Engineering even claims that just one of its plants will do the job of 40 million trees in literally a fraction of the space. And unlike trees and other plants, they can pretty much be placed anywhere on the planet. Plus, I'm thinking that Elon Musk is actually interested in this. He wants to use carbon capture in a place that doesn't exactly look too great for planting trees, or is even on this planet. I'm talking about Mars. You've seen it on my channel, you've probably seen it everywhere else. Elon Musk wants humans on Mars. SpaceX is developing Starship to be the big space boat to take people to the red planet. The thing is going to be the biggest and most powerful rocket ever built, but it still won't be able to carry the fuel it needs to make a return trip. So unless we want to just abandon people on the red planet, we're going to need to figure this part out. And that is where carbon capture comes in, because CO2 can actually be a surprisingly useful gas. Let me explain. So Starship uses SpaceX's Raptor engines, which run on a mix of methane and oxygen. One of the reasons SpaceX actually went with this fuel is because we can actually make it on the surface of Mars using a simple reaction known as the Battier process, where if you combine CO2 and hydrogen, you can get water and methane. You can split that water into hydrogen and oxygen, and then you're just left with everything you need to start with rocket fuel, which sounds pretty good, but that's not all. You can also use the water for drinking, for farming, for rehydrating foods, or you can combine it with more CO2 in different ways to be used in agriculture, or even to make plastic, which obviously would be extremely useful on Mars for making stuff, including more habitat for living. So just one baseline bit of chemistry, living on Mars and getting back safely becomes a whole lot more feasible. And to start all of this off, you would just need hydrogen, CO2. Hydrogen can be sent on an uncrewed Starship before a human mission, or it can be taken from the huge amount of water ice on the surface of Mars. And the great thing about Mars's atmosphere is that it's about 95% CO2. So for the CO2 part of the process, you just need a way to get it out of the air. Something like, oh, I don't know, direct air capture technology. When Elon Musk tweeted about this whole competition, someone asked him about this, and he clearly hinted that he obviously knows direct air capture has uses beyond climate change. It's actually been part of SpaceX's plan all along. They've always known that they're going to need a way to create fuel on Mars, and they're meant to be starting to trial the idea later this year, but there is still a lot that needs to be solved, including literally the idea of getting CO2 out of Mars's atmosphere. Because even if direct air capture technology sounded pretty amazing earlier on in this video, it's still got a long way to go. Like, it currently uses a lot of power. It's actually one of the biggest things that's holding it back right. It makes it really expensive. And if we want to run it on renewable energy, which really we should, then there's actually only going to be specific places that we can set them up. Some estimates even say that to remove the CO2 of just one cement factory, your direct air capture plant is going to need to be powered by a wind farm the size of Brussels. So all of this, combined with the upfront cost to actually scale these things up, means that we need a lot of innovation and investment. And that is why this new X Prize competition is so sweet. Sure, Musk might be most interested in it because it's going to help us survive on Mars and actually get back from Mars, but it's also going to directly impact life on Earth too. If we can combine lowering emissions with actually sucking CO2 out of the atmosphere, then we're going to be on the road to hitting net zero and even negative emissions in the future. And we'll also be able to not abandon people on Mars, which is also pretty great.
Carbon capture is expensive, and many people insist it must be generated by renewable power. But a wind farm that can power a direct air capture plant takes a huge amount of land, and so does planting and growing trees. So to manage the space and cost of carbon capture, it makes sense to capture carbon from flue gases of hard-to-abate industries, such as the coal industry, and utilize the devil incarnate environmentalists perceive as the enemy. Because with carbon capture technologies and innovative companies such as Climeworks, Carbon Engineering, LandTech, and CCM Technologies, humanity has the potential to regain CO2 and other pollutants for good. With redemption of what many see as garbage, pollution, or waste, we will realize the revelation of the new heaven and earth our brother John envisioned 2,000 years ago. The end of the Bronze and Iron Age has ended, and the Carbon Age is at hand. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you, Dr. Tara, for your presentation. And I think we will continue. It's a little bit changing the program. I received information that now we're going to have the presentation from Professor Rasool.
I need that answer for tonight.
Yes. Oh, we couldn't use a turtle.
They didn't work.
No, we tried.
So, we my work. Okay.
And Dr. Rasool, we have 20 minutes. Process.
Okay, Assalamualaikum. Good afternoon. It's of course a pleasure to be with you here. I really learned a lot today. It will be very difficult to follow the science and Mars and all of the technologies that are presented by you. But I tried my best to kind of bring it together. So what I'm presenting today is an existence-centric approach to land ethics in theory and practice. So first, I will talk about the human-centric approach in practical ethics. And then I will talk about the shortcomings of human-centric approach in sustainable development. And then I will talk about the new theory or the theory of Mullah Sadra toward an alternative theory of practical ethics, which is Mullah Sadra, the existence-centric theory in Latin. And after my discussion, Dr. Jafar Fayyad will continue on how we can teach this new theory to our next generation. So let's get started. An existence-centric approach to land ethics. So according to the dominant human-centric approach in practical ethics, such as engineering ethics and medical ethics, different stages of human-made projects, including pre-design, design, implementation, and application, should be value-sensitive. While these values generally are aimed to human-centered, this is all the involved values should improve human welfare, such as social justice and human health. So let's first talk about the human-centric approach in practical ethics. When you're talking about this approach, the human-centric approach in practical ethics, two phrases comes up, and you will still have people who argue for human-centric approach in practical ethics. So the first one is anthropocentrism, which one could argue for redefining this, considering its positive aspect, will remain that ecosystems constitute the life support system for humans. Therefore, anthropocentrism can and should be a powerful motivation for environmental protection. So what you see here is, anthropocentrism in its original connotation in environmental ethics is the belief that value is human-centered, and that all other beings are means to humans' end. So everything else other than human is a mean for us to use them, right? This concept has been mentioned in our previous papers as well, based on an ontology that sees humans as being the center of the world and maintaining attitudes, values, or practices which promotes human interest at the expense of the interest or well-being of other species or environment. The same argument for a human-centric approach is made with human chauvinism, which is of course clear regarding humankind as the central or most important element of existence. And if you even go to some of the interpretations of our religious texts, you see it very contradictory. So for example, if you refer to some of the commentaries of Quran,
you would see some commentaries which interpret Khalifatullah. Khalifa is the story, like the person who is the representative of God on earth. Or there are verses on the in Quran which says Ahsanul Khaliqin, like the human being is the best among other creations. So there are people, and I'm not going to cover this, there are exegetes and there are commenters, people who have said that this exists, like the human being, according to these verses, are the best among the creation. But there are other verses and also other interpretations at the same time. For example, another verse which says, Ulamun amthalukum, which says all other creations of God are nations amthalukum, similar to you, like you. You're not above them all. And also the other interpretations of Khalifa as Persian, which doesn't have the connotation of superiority, but has the connotation of servitude and serving them, serving the other creation. So these are some kind of the way that the human-centric approach is kind of the foundation for many of the ethics that practical ethics that we hear, or at least we would hear last decades or 3 years before the rise of ecological theology. But the problem of this approach is very clear, and I don't want to spend time on just going through all of them. I think the first one is utilitarianism, which you can see how everything else is being utilized in the interest of human beings, which would be the end. And the question would be, if we are the end, what is the end for us? And of course, like that's one of the main problem of this of the human-centric approach. The other one is like as it sounds, it's very egotistical. I mean, it's not inclusive regarding non-humans. It is you've seen like in the morning till now we talked a lot about the environmental crisis. And of course, it's not sustainable. Even if you wanted to save only human beings, so saving human beings in the long term wouldn't be possible with this theory. So it's self-destructive. So if you want, like, there are many ways to find a theory that is alternative to the theory of human basically centric approach. And one of these alternative theories is a theory by a philosopher who lived in Iran, in Shiraz actually, called Mullah Sadra. And he had a theory I want to talk a little bit about this theory and see how this theory basically changes the whole system and the way that you look at the universe in general. So to understand this theory, the theory of Mullah Sadra, I need two introductions. Introduction number one is to understand the difference between quiddity or form versus existence. When you ask Mullah Sadra what is quiddity and what is existence, he says the quiddity doesn't exist. It's an illusion that you have. It's not real. So for the form of things, this has one form, I have one form, this has one form, the plants have form, the raven have form, this wave's form is different from the other, this wave's form is different from the other. The forms are different, right? But the question is, what is the common reality between all of these different forms? What is the common reality between me, this laptop, wood, waves and everything in this universe. For him, all of the differences that you see are just liquidity and form, and those are illusional, meaning that those are not real. The real thing is the existence, wujud, which is the common element between everything, including God. The common element between everything, including God himself. So that's that for him, the existence is the main thing, and everything else would be some sort of illusion, right? So, meaning that these boundaries that we have to understand things. This is for Avicenna. Avicenna also talks about mahiyat and wujud, quantity, form versus existence. But Avicenna says that this is a mental distinction. For Mullah Fadl, this is a real distinction, meaning that form does not exist. This is really illusion. So the question then comes, if this is illusion, what would be the difference between, how do you differentiate between God, human being, and everything else? If all are the same, how do you differentiate between the God's existence and your own existence and everything else's existence? And his answer, and also many other philosophers or Gnostics who have responded to this question, is that they give us two metaphors. Metaphor number one for them is the metaphor of ocean. They would say, as you can see the differences in waves, we are different. My wave is different from your wave, like the form. Imagine like everything are waves, but they have different forms. So the question is, where is water and where is wave? He says, we all are water. That water is the simple existence, which is God, and everything else is the manifestation of him. When he is creating, everything else is a manifestation of him. And all of these waves have different forms. So now the other example that they give, the metaphor is the sun and break, like the light and the sun itself, right? You can't differentiate and say, oh, this is the sun, not the ray. You can't differentiate between the two, but you know there is a difference too, right? I mean, this is a huge discussion. We wouldn't be able, and I wouldn't be able to do justice here at all. But what I'm trying to say is that in this understanding, what is valuable, what is the core, is not the form, is the existence. And now if you come with this understanding, what does loving yourself mean? What would be yourself? You see, the more you expand yourself, you will be more part of the existence again. What I'm trying to say here is that when you have this view, loving everything else other than yourself is not loving other than yourself, is loving part of yourself. And harming everything other than yourself is not harming others, is harming yourself. Right? This is the understanding that he has by he brings. And I think if, of course, the love, hate, respect, dignity, all this will have a different meaning. So the dignity of human being has another basis. Is taking its premises from another premise, which is the existence dignity. So even human dignity is coming from the dignity of its existence. the definition of human being also changes here. So it has a lot of different implications, I thought this would be a good theory to talk about when we are talking about ecological theology. This discussion will continue, inshallah, with my colleague online, Dr. Jafar Fayyaz, who will talk about the ways and methods that we would be able to teach this existence-centric approach to our kids and other generations to come. And I will conclude here until we hear from Dr. Fayyaz next.
Thank you very much. It's not even shorter than we only used 60 minutes. We have one more presentation. Two more. Okay. And you have to inform us with us. Two presentation online, which is coming readily. Okay, are you with us now?
Yes.
Yes.
I'm here. So just to try to share my PowerPoint presentation. Share. Okay. Okay. So do you see my PowerPoint?
Before you start looking, should I ask you how much time you're presenting? 50. Hello, Doctor. Welcome. We are with you here. And according to Dr. Lucas, you have 50 minutes for presentation. We are looking forward to it.
Okay. Do you hear me well?
Yeah.
Okay. So hello, everyone. I'm very happy to be present with all of you at this great event, even virtually. And I would like to thank the authorities of the Orthodox Academy of Crete for hosting this meeting, and also the organizing committee, which is led by Dr. Andrianos, for this opportunity to present. So I don't know how to get rid of these additional windows. Probably somebody can give me advice, because I would like just to see my presentation, doesn't matter. So the topic of my presentation, I changed it a little bit because the time is very short. 15 minutes is very challenging. So I decided to be a little bit more specific. And this is the spiritual and ethical aspects of sustainability. And in particular, the importance of connection with nature. So the developing ecological crisis is obvious, and especially for such an educated audience. And here are just some illustrative diagrams. So, and indicators are very well known. And the problem is that basically the global ecological crisis is developing and progressing all the time. So our main concern, and probably this is the best kind of integrated picture when we consider the ability of Earth as a planet and our common environment on this planet to produce and basically assume our waste, and this is about planet biocapacity and our demand. We can see that around 1988, probably 1985, yes, so we exceeded basically the capacity of this planet to provide our needs as humanity. I think that most of you are familiar with a great basically estimation, which could be done beginning from individual level and then through family, community, nation, and so on. And there is, of course, global estimation, ecological footprint, which estimates how much productive land and water we need to support what we use and what we discard. And the problem is that in 2018, so 4 years ago, we can see that ecological footprint, global ecological footprint, totally for the humanity was 70% larger than the ability of the planet regenerate, to produce, regenerate, and so on. And this means that their biological capacity was exceeded by 70%. And you can see that here it's shown that even 4 years ago, it was already about 2 planets we would need to provide our needs as humanity. And now 4 years later, you see only 4 years later, 500 higher our needs. And within 4 years, you see, so this process is progressing, and that is how the capacity of your Earth is reduced by now. This continues only within 4 years. You see, it was worsened substantially. And here, our beautiful planet, although the estimation shows, and this is true because environmental degradation continues, we have only one. And at this point, we need 1.75. To slow down the global ecological crisis and global warming, it's understandable the immediate actions are needed. And basically, the concept of sustainable development shows how we would be able to reach sustainability or sustainable development, which are synonyms. Basically, the classical definition Brundtland Commission, from Brundtland Commission says that sustainability or sustainable development, this is what meets the needs of the present without compromising the ability of future generations to meet their own needs. And here it's necessary to touch upon different worldviews. Anthropocentric, of course, you all know what it means when everything in creation has instrument value for human. Biocentric, when we basically value of all life on this planet. Ecocentric, when we both value living and non-living nature. And cosmocentric, basically the most justified scientifically that our planet, our home with unique biosphere is a part of a larger system, solar system, Milky Way, galaxy, and so on. And basically of the whole creation. So this is the most progressive and scientifically based view, which is in agreement basically with all religions and spiritual communities stand in these terms. So this is a cartoon that would show like blind people try to define what is elephant, and you see the definitions they give. It shows that for holistic view of the world, we need, and cosmocentric, basically, we need to see the whole thing. And in terms of environment degradation and our planet, which as you saw now under such great pressure, we need to see it holistically. And another aspect that we need to be conscious about the uniqueness of this planet, and basically at all level, and this is my kind of very how to say, justified scientifically view that people should be educated at all ages, and especially in childhood. Children, school children, students should be reminded again and again, independently of the discipline or specialization in the specific area of knowledge. So they need to have this picture in front of their eyes or in their minds. And when we consider the concept of sustainability, which would be kind of a harmonic balance between the environment, the social system, economic system, so not very often the spiritual and ethical dimension of sustainability is emphasized, although of course it's kept in mind or assumed somehow, but not often directly it is addressed. And if we would have a look at possible scenarios, taking into account what is going on this planet and accelerating global ecological crisis. So this is from Atkinson Group, 2004. So their hope graph. You see, so we, at that point, it's almost 20 years ago, they would point out that there are kind of two ways. One is unsustainable, and basically we are exactly at this point, probably in the middle of this corridor or narrow period of time. You see, from 2000 to 2004, kind of 40-year period. So either if we follow unsustainable ways, so there will be collapse at some point, and it's also scientifically justified, especially the dangerous scenario if the changes in our environment could be not reversible. So it could happen basically because I do not go into details. This is the real danger. And if we switch to sustainable development, then we can kind of have a bright future as humanity and one large community on this planet. So, and again, I would like to talk about the time because you see in 2002, so kind of Millennium Development and Goals were basically developed and accepted by the whole community, kind of global. And you can look through these goals and they were kind of assumed to be achieved by year 2015. It's 7 years ago. It's obvious that they were not achieved. And to my mind, I think that a part of this problem that we do not address enough spiritual and ethical dimension of sustainability. Because if we look at this, and this is typical already kind of mainstream image of sustainable development, we do not see values or spirituality and ethical aspects of sustainable development. So what is spirituality? Let's talk a little bit about this because there are different definitions. So in this context, I define spirituality as our highest values and aspirations, like awe for creation, sense of wonder, appreciation of beauty and harmony of the universe, connection with and love for nature, reverence for life, oneness with all humanity, living and non-living world. So in this context, of course, this is kind of a deep religious feeling for people who are engaged with different religions or spiritual communities. And you can see here that creation and nature kind of equals each other in this context. And this is no surprise, because basically the nature is a manifestation of higher forces or God, or basically manifestation of God, as we can say. At least I'm a Christian, I can define it this way. So ethics is moral principles that govern personal behavior or conducting an activity. So ethics not just a philosophical issue, but it's actions, basically. Ethics defines actions. And it's obvious when we are talking about spirituality and ethics that this is all about values. And then I put, you see in the middle of this diagram, values, because what motivates us basically, and what defines our behavior and values, behavior and actions, values. And in terms of different religions, and there are a lot of different religions in the world, so they have kind of basic common values. There is a lot of research, and here are a lot of clergy, so of course you are more educated in this area and more aware of this. And in terms of care of creation, so what we observe in our time, so of course greening of face, so, and it's basically manifests in revision of scripture in a new context, growing and strengthening interfaith dialogue, disproportional growth of holistic faith and spiritual communities, which is obvious all over the world. One of the biggest concerns, and here I switch to the importance of connection with nature, this is urban growth. You see, it's exponential. So the diagram shows this exactly. And with urban growth, you know that basically people do not have much opportunity, especially children in the big cities, to connect with nature. So not enough opportunities. And on the other side, with this information revolution, so you can see children that would sit next to each other, even in some places when they have leisure time, and they would look into their phones. And there is statistics now that it's typical now in many even companies, when people have kind of free time together, or children somewhere, when they can communicate, they can talk, but they communicate by texting and so on. So what are the ways to form the connection with nature in urban kids? So now I will just list slide for illustrations, and I will share my experience as a parent, as an environmental educator a little bit. So of course, you can always see that children are happy when they are in the nature surroundings, and for any educators of any kind, I think now they should purposefully and consciously try to connect children with nature and just expose them in nature, because this connection is inherent. So because we are all connected to creation and to God and so on, and just being exposed to the nature, this will work without your, how to say, interference. Let them experience all elements of nature, fire, and again, they can use sun energy to burn something on the wood, water, earth, air when they jump. And you can see a contrast when they have artificial kind of animals, toys, toy animals. Look at the face expression. And now when they basically communicate with live animals, they are pets in this case. So if they have already a good connection with nature, they never wouldn't this with a dog or some other animal. So teach them to find and eat edibles in nature surroundings. Let them to participate in school scientific fairs, so much fun. And here they see Daphnia, for example, water flea for the first time in their life under the microscope. Here is a workshop for kindergarten in the United States I gave, also telling about Daphnia and introducing to the energy flow and food chain in the pond. Here is a community garden, and they are now all over the world. I saw them in Chicago, in New York, in Tokyo. Now I'm in Tallinn, and in Tallinn as well. This is my granddaughter with some harvest in the community garden in Durham, University of New Hampshire, I am affiliated with. So read books and watch movies about nature together. And so they will have connection with nature, which once established will never be lost. So thank you very much for your attention. And if I have time for some questions, would be great.
Thank you. We're 5 minutes over time, so I don't think we have time for questions this time. But just a short introduction of yourself, because you're not here and we don't know who you are. Can you please tell where you're working? Okay. Then I think we just should.
I have difficulty to hear you. I basically increased volume.
No, but that's fine. We will move on to the next session. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you very much, and best greetings to everyone, my dear friends and colleagues. Thank you.
Please stop sharing screen. Could you please stop sharing? If you can restart, leave and restart.
Irina, I think you have to stop sharing your screen.
Ah, okay. So I will just, I cannot. Is it okay now?
It is.
I can just leave because I do not have much experience with. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you very much. And we have one last set presentation. Actually, we're a little bit over time now, but we would like to give the word to Father Abina. Are you with us, Father?
Yes, I am. Yes, I am.
Yes. Now I can see you. Thank you. Nice to see you. Last time was in my house, I think, in Norway.
Yeah.
Yes.
Father Tom, how are you?
Yeah, I'm fine. He's from the Orthodox Church, working in Ethiopia, working as a pastor, father in London, and he's taking his PhD in ecotheology in Sweden. So you have 15 minutes, and please respect the time, Father, because we are a little bit over schedule. Thank you.
Okay. So. I just want to make it a slideshow. Okay, I think, yeah. Yeah, thank you very much for giving me the time to present. Though it is a very short time. I was aspiring to be in person in Crete, but because of extensive travels to Ethiopia, Sweden, and here in England, I couldn't make it in person, but thank God that I'm online and see you online after a few years. My title is Ascetic Sanctity and Creation Cohabitation. This article has been taken, is an extract from my doctoral thesis entitled as Living and Identified with Creation. Ascetic withdrawal involves confrontations internally with oneself, with the body, and externally with the nature. The ascetic is expected to overcome the temptations and strike right balance between renunciation and caring in one hand, and also endure the difficulties faced as a result of exposure to the wilderness in the forests, mountains, or deserts. On the other hand, the relationship between ascetics and the creation around them is framed with their approach towards overcoming the inner and the outer challenges. As Theocritus suggested, there are three states on how the ascetics approach creation around them. The first is contrary to nature, and the second is conformity with nature, and the other is acting as beyond nature. There is no instance that ascetics intentionally went against nature, whereas the ascetics start to live in conformity with creation around them and gradually progress into the level that they reach to be beyond nature. There is a famous sentence which is frequented by the Ethiopian ascetic texts used to illustrate how the ascetic cohabit with creation around them. and live in conformity with nature. The sentence literally says that the ascetic live in the wilderness, sustained in the dew of air, cushioned with stones, endure the heat of the day and the cold of the night, tolerate violence of demons and roaring of wild beasts. It is named in Amharic ጤዛ ልሰው ደንጊያ ተንተርሰው የቀኑን ሐሩር የሌሊቱን ቁር ታግሰው ጸባ አጋንንቱን ድምፀ አራዊቱን ታግሰው. You may not realize the Amharic, but it is literally translated as they sustained the dew, cushioned with stones, endure the heat of the day and the cold of the night, tolerate the violence of demons and roaring of wild beasts. Cohabitation of ascetics with the creation try to connect, in living with the creation, the ascetics try to connect to their relation with the Creator. The love of the Creator of all things, according to Theocritus, is the key to all that embraces all creation. One of the prominent saints, Saint Gabriel Manfas Kadus, lived with all creation around him. According to his biography or hagiography, he has been depicted as he stayed in the lake with fishes and whales and sea dragons, and lived under trees with birds, in the forest with lions and leopards, bears and serpents. The hermits lovingly care for the already existing creation around them. Living and identified with animals. The hermit-animal relationship is one of the very important components of ascetic life. The ascetics are connected with two animals, which are described both in positive and negative terms in many accounts. The beasts in some stories are shown to be enemies of the hermits, where on some other accounts they are also expressed to be aides and companions. Some hagiographic texts, for instance, Life of Antony, depict wild animals as symbols of demons, in whose disguise they approach the hermit for temptation. Whereas in Ethiopic hagiographic texts, most of the animals are depicted as respective subjects of the saints and by whose masters they have been tamed to obey their words. The hermit-animal interaction, as recorded in the Ethiopian ascetic texts, spanned from the hostile and uncertain to a friendly and familiar relationship. The progression is not limited with familiarity. Rather, it also grows up into the achievement of a tamed and pacified transformation of dangerous animals. The relation further heightened to the level that an integrated zoomorphic appearances of ascetic saints. There are some instances that the saints appeared covered with hairs and having a frightening look like lions. In addition to the physical resemblance of the ascetic animal relationship, further enhanced due to the portrayal of animals as possessing more heightened rationality than it is proper to their nature. There are lots of hagiographic accounts which state that the ascetic saints spoke with, listened to, and interact with non-human creation in the same manner they interact with their human fellows. The integral resemblance of ascetic saints to the animals went beyond hermit-animal relationship, living in forests and identified with trees. Forests are used as domicile of the ascetics for both solitary devotion as well as cohabitation with the other creation. Christian asceticism in Syria, Egypt, and Palestine mostly identified with deserts and desert wilderness, whereas in Orthodox churches of Ethiopia and Eritrea, asceticism and ascetics are related to forests and mountain wilderness. An ascetic center or a monastery itself is termed in Ethiopic as Gadam, which literally means forest, whereas gradually it grows to be designated for a name for a monastery or an ascetic center. And the ascetics themselves have been called as forest men or forest women, in Ge'ez, Gadamawian. The relationship between ascetics and forest is intimate for the reason that the forest is used as food, clothing, shelter, and place of devotion for the ascetics. As it was expressed in the ascetic-animal relations, the ascetic-forest relationship also developed from just using the trees for sustenance to the extent of an integral living and identification of ascetics with plants or trees. Moreover, gradually, church and monastery forests became home of ascetic saints and later respectful covers of the church and monasteries. For this reason, trees planted around churches and monasteries in an intent to respectfully cover the sacred church, which is central to the sanctity, and also to shelter ascetics who are living in the monastery and the church. Moreover, the hagiographies depict ascetics in an integral resemblance with trees. One of the famous expressions of the ascetic saints in the Ethiopian liturgical hymns is related to the Old Testament passage, which is said as, "The righteous shall flourish like a palm tree. They shall grow like a cedar in Lebanon. Those who planted in the house, or who have been planted in the house of the Lord shall flourish in the courts of our God. They shall still bear fruit in old age." And this is a liturgical hymn named as Misbach, or an interliturgical chant to be sung on the feast days of saints. There is also a wider tradition of depicting saints with palm trees, which are not going to be dealt at this moment, but will be considered in further details for the future. Living and praying in water. In the Ethiopian Orthodox ascetic tradition, saints celebrated in connection with with their miracles on water bodies such as seas, lakes, rivers, and springs. Based on the hagiographic sources, their attachment to the waters can generally fall under three major categories. The first, there are ascetic saints who stayed in lakes or shores of lakes for prayers and devotion for years, like Saint ገብረ መንፈስ ቅዱስ and Saint Christos Samra. There are also some who crossed over rivers miraculously, like Saint Abuna Eustatius. And there are also some saints who miraculously made springs out of rocks or grounds for healing purpose. According to the hagiography, Saint Christos Samra spent in the waters of Lake Tana for decades, praying several hours a day, seeking forgiveness for sinners. The spot where the saint prayed is consecrated as monastery at the moment and preserved for centuries, while the other water bodies and the other forest coverages have been depleted in successive deforestation and drying. Great ascetics like Abuna Eustatius and Abuna Philippos are linked to miraculous crossing of rivers without boat or ship, according to their hagiographies, and they have been named as Kafale Bahar in Ge'ez, or literally translated as dividers of the sea. And the spot where they made this miracle, where it is believed that they made this miracle, is preserved for centuries, while the surrounding area has been deforested. Saint Lebanos is also known for miraculous act of blessing spring water from a rock with his crosshead rod or Batra Maskal. Generally, part or whole of the water bodies linked to the life and miracles of ascetic saints are regarded as sites of healing and blessing. And because of this healing and blessing, they are preserved for centuries. Conclusion: the relationship between the ascetic saints and non-human creation generally started with fear and uncertainty. Through physical acquaintance and divine interventions, as a result of the ascetic devotion and peaceful cohabitation, however, the relation improved to a friendly interaction and integral resemblance. Entering to the inner, the prime purpose of monastic life is to devote oneself to God through some measure of separation, physical and spiritual, from the busy social world, and go to the remote places to be alone with God. Monastics leave the community to distance themselves from the temporal world in a quest for sanctity. Ascetics devote to prayers in order to make an intentional choice to gradually imitate the apostles who have imitated Christ. In this sense, they resent everything, every care, every relationship, every superfluity that could distract them from the ceaseless worship of God. Detached from the social world, whereas monks try to deter distractions and maintain strong attachment to their new spiritual world, and cohabit with the non-human creation around them. Hagiographic texts demonstrate that the life of ascetic saints in the forest and mountain wilderness in a harmonious relationship with the non-human creation around them is comparable to the Garden of Eden before the fall. The depiction of fragrance as an ascetic saint, as a saint feeling of the forest and the familial interaction with non-human creation. Ethiopian monastic tradition praises not only the ascetic, but also the place the ascetic saints lived and the non-human creation with the ascetics interacted with during their earthly life. The ascetic sanctity starts from the hermits and transcends to the environment they devoted themselves to God. Sacredness of monasteries likewise starts from the altar in the center and the ascetic conduct and worship, and out goes to all natural creation and monumental features within the peripheral boundaries of the monastery itself. The famous phrase, "Let its interior be paradise and its exterior fire," is used in delineation of the consecration of a new monastery to differentiate it from the ordinary places, and that is meant to be preserved. Everything, lively or not, will be preserved untouched forever. So in such a way, the ascetics contribute for the creation of care and preservation of nature. Thank you for listening and giving me this chance.
Thank you very much, Farah. And maybe I should mention that he has published a really interesting article in the book. Can you show that, Lucas, which I gave you? The blue book. It's just behind you. Yes, there it is. Yes, and the Farah Abina has published that article. Then somebody's interested in reading more about his work. Nice to see you again, and we will have a short coffee break, 5 minutes now. Thank you.
Coffee break again, it's stairs. Oh, doing this normal, you're great. Yes. Yes.
So I'm monitoring. Well, I think each have 15 minutes. Can I have a coffee so that then it can so that I can send to the university. So when I
I'm Dr. Faiz Jafir. Good evening. I am the moderator, Lasya Sabada, for this session here. And we're going to start off with presenter Dr. Faiz Jafir from the United States. And each of the presenters have about 15 minutes, a maximum of 20. And I will, at 2 minutes before it's ending, give you I'll talk on the microphone for you to let you know you have 2 minutes left, okay? So we'll start off with you, Dr. Faiz Jafir from the United States. Okay? Can you hear me?
I can. Thank you so much.
Okay.
I'm just going to share my screen.
You are on.
Yep. Can you all see my screen? Is that okay?
Not yet. Not yet. We can't see your screen.
You can? Okay. Thank you all again for your time. And unfortunately, I wasn't able to be present in your company. But just very, very quickly, as a very quick introduction, my colleague, Dr. Rasul Naqvi, spoke a little while ago, perhaps earlier today, and I'm going to be presenting a more practical aspect toward his theoretical conversation entitled An Existence-Centric Approach to Land Ethics, Theory and Practice. So he may have spoken to you all a little while earlier with regards to some of the challenges that people of faith encounter in terms of teaching the importance and centrality of eco-theology. And so what I wanted to speak to you all about naturally is some practical methods that can be employed in terms of different educational methodologies that either individuals of faith or academics can utilize in speaking to their communities about the importance of practicing sort of an eco-theological lifestyle. So like we all know, very, very introductory, in order to just introduce the subject, practical eco-theology is a perspective in which we recognize a sense of sacredness in all the existence that surrounds us. And this is evident within Islamic scripture as well, namely the Quran and Hadith sources, which are the two primary sources of Islamic knowledge. There are 3 verses in the Quran, which of course is the staple and most sacred text for Muslims, which speak to this notion of an eco-theological lifestyle that the human being naturally needs to bear. Dr. Naqvi spoke a little while earlier with regards to the sense of human chauvinism or the sense of arrogance that many human beings feel in their assumption that we are the center of the world, oftentimes to the neglect of all of those natural resources that are around us. And this actually goes against that which is presented within Islamic scripture. A Quranic verse states that in chapter 18, verse number 7, that which is present within the earth, firstly and foremostly, is a means by which God tests the human being. Secondly, in chapter 7, verse 31, there is a commandment to not waste, recognizing again that so much of that which we waste contributes to so much of the inequities that we see within nature. And then thirdly and finally, in chapter 6, verse 38, which is a really, really important verse mentioned within the whole Quran, and will undoubtedly be something significant in the paper that we're going to be presenting as well, is the importance of recognizing the animal species as a species that have communities just like us, the human being. The same way that we care within our own families, within our own communal networks, there is also a necessity then to have that sense of care and love and adoration for those around us, particularly with regards to the animal species. So what exactly is the problem here? There is this dominant human-centric approach in practical ethics. Everything is about us, and everything is about accumulation, and everything is about how the human being can be successful in our transient time while we are situated in this world. If we live for 70 or 80 years, most people are thinking about how we can be successful during the course of these 70 or 80 years. We're not thinking about anything beyond myself, my family, and maybe my children or maybe my grandchildren, but probably nothing beyond that. And so our lives are so focused on this notion of accumulation and on this notion of comfortability, again, often to the detriment of all of the nature that surrounds us. As Nasser mentions, today this forest is destroyed because of man's rights. That sea is polluted because of man's supposed needs. Man is made absolute, his rights dominating over both God's rights and the rights of God's creation. We have made ourselves the center of the existence, again, often to the neglect of anything and everything around us. Mullah Sadra, who died in the year 1636, 17th century scholar, he presents what was mentioned earlier by my colleague, Dr. Naqvi, this existence-centric theory. And just to offer a very, very quick summary, the idea that Sadra proposes is that the individual needs to see themselves not as the center of the world, but rather a drop in this very, very large ocean. That at the end of the day, we're taking a look at this top-down approach. God is the creator, and all of the creations live in this massive network. And this network that we are living in needs to be navigated in such a way that we have a sense of understanding, appreciation for the advancement of all. And the advancement of all is also to the benefit and to the advancement of us, you and I, individuals living at this very given moment. So what I want to speak to you all about, again, very briefly for 5 or 7 minutes, are some sort of perspectives in terms of how exactly we can teach this notion of practical eco-theology. I know that those who preceded me and many of those who spoke after me are speaking to this notion through a particular religious lens. My background in education, I wanted to take a look at different methodologies that we can utilize to employ how we can communicate these issues to the masses. I know that many of those listeners and those in the audience are people of faith within faith spaces. Faith leaders have their own places of worship and congregations that they communicate and speak to, while others are educators, professors, they teach in a classroom. But all of us are linked to a community. And thus, that link that we have to our respective communities is also a sense or a call to responsibility. So how can we then teach and center this existence-centric approach? I postulate this on 2 different dimensions. The first dimension is what the individual, you and I, the faith practitioner, the educator, the academic, the faith leader, however we position ourselves respective to our own communities, have to do in terms of pushing out this agenda. And secondly, what is the methodology then that we can seek toward applying to our communities? So the first phase, or the first step that we need to take, is to embrace this notion of cultural humility. After we embrace this notion of cultural humility, then thereafter we can seek toward applying these structured learning activities or methodologies in which we are able to teach this to our respective communities. So what exactly is cultural humility, and what exactly are these structured learning activities? Cultural humility, again, is that which you and I, every single individual in this setting, needs to seek toward applying. Let me just take one step back and mention that cultural humility is a term that's often thrown around in social work or thrown around amongst many medical practitioners or those sort of in the health sciences. But it can undoubtedly be applied to individuals just like you and I, and those who are situated as well within a more classroom setting. So what exactly is cultural humility? Cultural humility is defined as a reflective process that contributes to an awareness of our own privileges, oftentimes associated with the fact that I am of a particular racial background, I am of a particular socioeconomic status, I am of a particular gender. And then I have to be aware that these privileges are not had by individuals who are not or who don't have those same identities. In the United States of America, where I live and where I'm situated, my experience is very, very different than the experience of someone who's Black. Why? Because of decades, if not centuries worth of isolation and marginalization of Black people due to law and legislation within the United States. I'm a man. I don't understand the experience of a woman. So I have to understand then that I need to be a better listener. I need to be someone who is able to be receptive toward their experiences so that I'm able to grow within my own identity as well. So once we are understanding of this need to be more self-reflective, and again, where this is often utilized again within a classroom or within more sort of social justice education, it's important for the sense of cultural humility where I understand that I am of privilege because I am a human being. While all of the other creations within nature, be it land, be it water, be it the animal species, every single one of these other communities, be they living in terms of animals or not, like that of water and air and so on and so forth, that I have already posited myself, or I'm already at a position of privilege because I have identified myself, or we as a human being have identified ourselves as the center of all of the attention, the center of the world. So once I'm able then to understand that I have posited myself, or that we as a human being have posited ourselves as the center of this attention, then we are able to enter into a state of humility. Once I identify the problem, in other words, I'm able to fix the problem. So how does, again, then this translate to eco-theology? Again, we take a seat back and we reflect upon our own privileges. How am I contributing, to this problem? Am I contributing to this problem? Once we do that, we are going to be able to be better teachers, better educators, better faith practitioners, better faith leaders, and we're able to communicate that which is needed. And that brings me then toward the second stage. Stage number one is when the individual themselves, again, has to understand where we are situated and have the sense of humility in approaching the subject matter. Thereafter, we are able to teach it to our communities, respective of where we are positioned within our respective communities as well. And this teaching methodology is a three-step process. The first step, again, where we can utilize this language and then translate it to eco-theology is what I'm hoping to do. The first step, again, is to build this sense of self-awareness. You can go ahead and tell your community, we need to tell our students, our communities, that I was self-reflecting and I was humble during the course of this process, and I understand how I also contribute to the problem. When we make ourselves vulnerable in that environment, particularly people of faith, there is a much more opportunity for individuals to be receptive to that, which we were saying, and there are numerous studies as well to provide evidence to that. The second is to provide supervised experiences in oftentimes what is known as marginalized communities. When I want to teach about race, or when I want to teach about privilege when it comes to gender or socioeconomic status, I need to take my students, I need to take my community and allow for them, for instance, to see the Black American experience. I need for them to see as men those challenges that women have to endure in academic settings, for instance. But over here, the marginalized community is everything other than the human species, because this is the way that we're approaching it. So we need to be able to truly bring them so they're able to see with the eye. They are able to see what contributions the human being has made toward the deficiency of these other communities, be it water, be it the pollution in the sky, be it other animal species, so on and so forth. Once they're able to see, then we can bring them back into our communities and into the classrooms and speak about practical things that we can do as individuals on the basis of where we are at. So again, if I were to just go back and summarize very, very quickly, assuming that we take Sadra's approach and suggest that the major problem that the human being often has to undergo and endure in terms of their recognition of the lack of an eco-theological lens by which we approach the world is to take this more existence-centric approach, then again, we need to follow two educational methodologies. The first one of them is cultural humility, that which we employ to ourselves. And secondly, thereafter, utilize the structured learning activity method toward communicating that to our respective communities. Thank you so much. I won't take any more of your time, and I look forward to your feedback.
Thank you very much, Dr. Faiz. Very well and succinctly said. So our next presentation is
Does it change again?
changed again? Okay, Majabin. Okay. Okay. Thank you for the change. So the next one is going to be presented by Majabin Dahla from the United States, and it's entitled The Prayer of the Planet, Environmental Ethics in Islam. Okay, so you have about 15 minutes, Majabin. Okay? Good? Welcome.
Hello, thank you. Just a quick check that you can hear and see me.
Yeah, it's all good.
Good. Thank you so much. Thank you for giving me this opportunity to participate in this conference that is looking at some very interesting and intriguing aspects of eco-theology and, of course, environmental ethics. My name is Dr. Majabin Dahla. I'm here, I'm joining you from California in the United States of America. I teach Islamic studies. I'm an assistant professor at the Graduate Theological Union in Berkeley, where I also chair the Women's Studies and Religion program. So for my paper today, I'm going to be looking at environmental ethics from the sacred text, which is the Quran, but I am going to also be using an ecofeminist lens to be able to unpack a few important aspects of how the human and the more than human residents of this world are interconnected. So what I'm going to do is very quickly start sharing my screen and take you through a series of slides. And as I am doing this, I am going to be borrowing three concepts, which are feminist theory concepts, but I am sort of extending them into an ecofeminist lens to be able to interpret a few slides or a few verses from the Holy Quran. The first thing that I'm going to do is bring up the concept of agency, which is a very important aspect of feminist theory, where choice and a matter of choice is of pivotal understanding. So I'm going to be using the agency lens and extending that in an ecofeminist argument in reading some of the verses of the Quran. The second thing that I'm going to do is that I am going to argue again from the verses of the Quran about the organic and social enterprise that the universe presents itself as. So the social entity that the universe should be understood as. And then the third thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to invoke the ecofeminist lens of environmental justice and look at how some of the verses of the Quran also speak about the body of a female and the body of a female animal, and at the same time, the body of the planet. And that is where I'm going to draw upon how I have titled this paper, and that is the prayer of the planet. And the prayer of the planet is actually a part which is taken from Mafatihul Jinan, which is a very common prayer book available in the households of Muslims, especially Shia Muslims. And they draw upon this as an almanac, and they read a lot of their hymns and their prayers from this book. And in this book, the author, Sheikh Abbas Qummi, is talking about the spiritual benefits of the Friday evening, the evening that Muslims prepare for their special prayers. And he says that at this time, even the creatures in the sea and the creatures that fly in the sky, they all humble themselves in front of their Lord, and they say, God, protect us from the actions of human beings. And this speaks to the interconnectedness that I want to talk about. So very quickly, I'm going to start sharing my screen. And within the time that I have, I'm going to hopefully go through these three aspects as well. If you just give me a moment. And there we are. I hope you can see my screen. And I'm just going to go through these slides very quickly. So to talk about the agency of the planet, and what do I mean by the agency of the planet? Before I get into that, I want to talk about how the Quran actually talks about the harmony that is available within the celestial bodies. And this harmony then yields a kind of stability, which then serves the human residents of the planet. So there are many verses in the Quran, as you can see on the left side of your screen here, and I can just make this a full screen so you can see that. There are many verses in the Quran that talk about how the celestial bodies operate in a very harmonious fashion without encroaching upon each other's orbit or each other's functionalities. For example, this last verse that you see here on the left side of the screen, which says, "Neither does it behoove the sun to overtake the moon, nor does the night outrun the day, and each swim in their ordained orbit." So this harmonious living and coexistence within the celestial bodies is one of the prime reasons to why there is stability in the planet. There is stability around us. So the universe is teaching us, for there to be stability, there needs to be a kind of harmony. And this harmony and stability then beget or yield a source of sustenance for the human residents of the planet. These verses talk about how the sea and the subservientness of the sea, the service of the sea, allows for the moving of objects by traders in those days. And of course, there's so many different ways in which we utilize it today. So the sea and the earth and the mountains, all these work together so that the human residents can find means of sustenance. And I want to draw your attention to the last verse again here, and the last part of that verse, which says, God ordained all of this so that it can be a means of sustenance, alike for all the seekers, which means even within the human residents of this world, there is equity and equal access. At least that is what the sacred text of the Muslims is iterating here, that there is equal access for everyone to all the natural resources so that they can deploy them for the search of sustenance. Not only does the harmony of the universe provide for physical and material prosperity of the human beings, but in an Islamic context, the harmony that it provides also then regulates the devotional practice of the Muslims. So it sort of provides an Islamic almanac. There are several verses of the Quran, and you can see them on your screen here, that talk about how the movement of the sun and the moon provide the times for the prayer, the Muslim prayer every day, and how the shifting shapes of the crescent and the moon and the different phases determine the dates of the lunar calendar. So the harmony begets physical, spiritual, and devotional stability to especially the Muslim lived experience. But this is where I bring in the aspect of agency. This universe that is serving us in this way, is it doing it mechanically? Is it doing robotically? Does it have a say in how it functions? Or is there a sense of agency? Are the universe, are the bodies in the cosmos actually cognizant? Do they understand what they're doing? And I argue through the ecofeminist lens that there is agency. The heavens and the earth are cognizant creatures of God, and they chose to submit and serve the human residents of the world. I say this because in several other places of the Quran, the universe is called as chanting, sabbaha, or worshiping God. And there can be no worship when there is no agency, because worship cannot be made forcibly on the creatures of God. Only when they choose to worship can they worship. So there is a sense of agency. And to that, I bring this verse Q41:11, where God says, when he created the heavens and the earth, he says, come willingly or unwillingly. And they answered, we come heartily. Now, most exegetes have translated this come willingly or unwillingly as an authoritarian voice of the deity, that there is no choice. When God calls, you come. But I argue that this is contradicting the merciful God paradigm that the Quran speaks about. And again, the worship aspect, because worship cannot be forcibly demanded from the creatures. It has to be a matter of choice. So I argue this come willingly or unwillingly can be read as a choice given to the universe. And they then chose to come willingly to God. Another way of understanding this choice is the next verse that you see on this slide, which says that God presented this trust to the heavens and the earth, and they said they didn't want to bear this trust. But the human beings undertook it, and they said, yes, we will take it. Now, many exegetes have translated the trust here to mean free will or freedom to choose. When it was presented to the heavens and the earth, maybe in this verse which says come willingly or unwillingly, they decided, they chose not to choose. So they chose a complete submission to God. And in doing that, they sort of exonerated themselves from being held accountable on Judgment Day. And the human beings chose free will. And they said, yes, we'll take on this free will. And because of this free will, now they will be held accountable on Judgment Day. So juxtaposing these two verses together, I think there is enough proof for us to introduce this interpretation that the heavens and the skies and the cosmos that we live in is a conscious and cognizant creation of God, and it has chosen to submit itself to the service of humankind. And because it has done that, it has become an instructor of humankind, and it has become a canvas for inquiry. There are many verses in the Quran that say, go back and look at the universe and let the universe teach you. You will find that in that harmony, there is no discrepancy at all. And that is why it becomes a laboratory for human experiment. Especially this verse that you see on the left side of your slide, where God says, go back and look into the universe, look into how the birds fly, look into the way the universe has been layered, and you will not find a flaw in it. Because it is flawless, it serves as an instructor and it serves as an instruction. I want to bring in a second aspect that I want to talk about and stay within my time frame, that not only is the universe sensible, if we're going to read Q41:11 as a sensibleness for the universe, but I argue that the universe is also sensitive, as in it feels pain. It can feel emotions. And for that, I bring in this verse that you see on the top of your screen here. And this is Q44:29, where God says in the narrative of Moses and the children of Israel, neither the sky wept for them, nor were they missed. So the weeping of the sky, and this is in the narrative of Moses and of course the emancipation of the children of Israel, when the sea is parted and Moses takes the children of Israel on the other side, the tribes of Israel on the other side of the river Nile. But when the Pharaoh, who is the antagonist in this narrative, and his men are within the Nile, it sort of drowns them. You know, the sea closes and they drown. And when they die and they meet this fate of theirs, the Quran says the sky did not weep for them. And I ask this question, is this a metaphoric idea of the sky weeping? Or is this an indication that the universe is sensitive to human actions? That human actions can have cosmic consequences and the cosmos can feel it. Now, the weeping of the sky emerges again in the 7th century historian Ibn Tawus's work when he talks about the sacrifice or the murder of Imam Hussein on the plains of on Karbala on the day of Ashura, which is commemorated by Shias every year. And he brings in this idea that on that day, the skies wept. Of course, there is another parallel record in the Anglo-Saxon chronicles of the 7th century about the weeping of the sky or the sky raining blood. But this is a phenomenon of how, because of global warming, the sand is picked up through evaporation and then becomes part of the moisture of the sky and comes down back on the earth. And when it comes back on the earth, it resembles red in color, most people calling it blood rain. So be it the massacre of people who stand up for justice, or be it global warming, there is an idea that the universe is interconnected. It is an organic and social entity which feels pain. So whatever we are doing with the planet and on the planet, it is not like it is not sensitive and it does not feel. The last thing that I want to bring about, what I want to talk about is, of course, the concept of justice as it is portrayed in feminist theory, ecofeminist theology, and also as a theological doctrine in Islam. And that is the doctrine of justice. And just to end this conversation—
Excuse me, Mahari, you've got 2 minutes left.
Okay.
2 minutes.
Thank you. I'm going to wrap up in 2 minutes. And in these 2 minutes, I'm going to bring this aspect of justice. And the justice aspect here is brought about by the body of the female, the body of a female animal, and then the body of the planet. So you see the verses here on your left are Q81, 1-9, and they talk about the day of judgment. And it is said, a big depiction of the picture of the day of judgment is given here, and it is said that the first case that is brought in front of the Lord is the case of the girl buried alive, and she will be asked for what sin was she buried alive. And this is an indication, of course, to infanticide, female infanticide that was prevalent in 7th century Arabia. Nonetheless, it is the body of the woman that will be the first question that will be raised on the day of judgment. And in another narrative, there is the hamstringing of the she-camel of Saleh. And because of the lack of time, I won't go into the deeper context of this, but then God says that this animal was a sign of God and it was given equal access to drink water. But the people killed this animal, and then they faced a cosmic consequence that happened. And then the last thing that I want to equate it with the planet is that on the day of judgment, it is said that the earth will speak and will relate and narrate her chronicles. Again, bringing back the concept of justice, that whatever happens to the planet, on the planet, is being recorded by a cognizant, a sensible, a sensitive universe that will then become a document of all human actions. So according to the Quran, in summarizing and reading a few verses of the Quran, we see that ecological justice demands an acknowledgement that the universe is serving humankind through agency. Secondly, it is an organic and social entity which feels and is interconnected. And thirdly, that it demands justice and it demands that it should be heard. Thank you so much for your time. I hope we can talk more about this, and I look forward to listening to my other panelists. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Dr. Mahjabeen. That was very, very interesting and informative for us all here. So the next person that's going to be presenting is Professor Marika van Duin from the Netherlands, Facing the World's Shadow, a union term in relation to climate change and economic injustice. Are you there, Marika? You want Chris now? Okay. Okay, there's been a change. Chris, Professor Chris Durante from the United States will be giving a presentation on ecological sin, repenting for our trespasses against nature. Welcome, Chris.
Thank you very much for having me. Can everybody hear me? I'll take that as a yes. Thank you so much for allowing me to Zoom in, and thank you to the organizers, and all apologies for not being able to be with you all. I really regret not being able to get away from my university obligations. However, it's really my loss. I would have loved to be there in person with everyone. I will be speaking from an Orthodox Christian perspective. I'm an ethicist, and I won't waste too much time with introductions. You can read about me in the program or look me up. But I will be speaking on ecological sin, as you all heard. And let me just share my screen here. So this idea of ecological sin, repenting for our trespasses against nature. I'm taking the idea that Patriarch Bartholomew put forth in 1997, and I'd like to develop this idea and really take the idea of ecological sin and argue that it is not simply a matter of personal sin, which it is, but it's primarily a form of collective sin. And I hope you'll see that develop as my presentation goes along. To open with this quote, for humans to cause species to become extinct and to destroy the biological diversity of God's creation, for humans to degrade the integrity of the earth by causing changes in its climate, stripping the earth of its natural forests, or destroying its wetlands, for humans to contaminate the earth's waters, its land, its air, and its life with poisonous substances. These are sins. Patriarch Bartholomew uttered this in 1997, which was very progressive at the time and still remains such. This idea has been taken up by Pope Francis and Archbishop Justin Welby of the Anglican Communion as well, and is gaining traction throughout the Christian and interfaith worlds. Bartholomew has also argued that this ecological crisis constitutes an expression of a general moral crisis. I couldn't agree more. And that the root cause of our environmental sin lies in our self-centeredness and in the mistaken order of values, which we inherit and accept without any critical evaluation. These are important points, and I'd like to briefly elaborate on, sorry, I meant to do this, some of these mistaken values. The first is arguably our anthropocentrism, which we've heard about in the other two, and especially the first talk on this panel. As a species, humanity has been self-centered. We have viewed nature as having only instrumental value. And we have tended to interpret our responsibility to care for the planet as a license to subjugate, control, and extract value from nature. Another mistaken value that we've had is our atomism. Not only our separation from one another, an overly individualistic sort of ethos that has been permeating through modernity, but also our separation from natural world, neglecting our interdependence with ecosystems in the biosphere. The last two really bring this into the socio-political and socioeconomic orders. The mistaken view that technology will save us from the ecological crisis. Now, this is not meant to be a tirade against technology. Technology and policy will certainly be required to help us out of our ecological crisis. What I have in mind here is our misplaced faith in the idea that technological innovations can only improve human life. And finally, our misguided understanding of prosperity as abundance, or the myth that more is always better. This has led to overproduction and overconsumption due to our misunderstanding of prosperity as abundance rather than prosperity as flourishing. Well, what is sin in the Greek Orthodox tradition? The idea of sin is amartia, and amartia literally means to miss the mark, kind of like when an archer or a dart player misses the goal. This implies that sin is not just about breaking laws, but sin is about missing the goal of goodness, missing the mark, as it were, to strive towards excellence. So sin is a failure to attain the goal of being good. This implies sin is the failure to attain closeness with the divine, and sin is the failure to live with correct purpose. Collectively, humanity has failed to live as a steward of the earth. And within Holy Scripture and the Christian, and here the Jewish tradition, right, nature is described as galon, talb in the Hebrew. And both terms mean both good and beautiful. This is important because it implies a stewardship hermeneutic, not one of domination. This idea of dominus from the Latin, meaning dominion, as implying a responsibility for. So there's a stewardship model, and arguably within the hermeneutic here of Genesis and even in certain New Testament passages from Paul, the idea is that humans have a task, and part of our task, part of our purpose is to partake in God's recreative work of renewal of life. That we have a responsibility to care for nature, to cultivate life, and to offer our activities for the well-being of not only ourselves, but the well-being of nature. This is part of our purpose. Going back to the patristic and medieval fathers of the Orthodox Church, from Chrysostom to Maximus to Palamas, the earth has been described as mother and nurse. Maximus puts forth a very panentheistic view of divine omnipresence. And Grigoris Palamas has described divine energies of a cosmic order permeating all of creation. This means that creation is sanctified. There's a certain sacrality to the created order. To this end, Bartholomeus has said that the protection of nature can be seen as the veneration of God. This implies that all natural biotic life is sanctified. And worthy of being protected and respected. The Orthodox theologian John Zizioulas has said that the sanctification of created life bestows upon each life uniqueness that makes it irreplaceable. This is very important because uniqueness and irreplaceability become part of the sanctified aspect of life. Yet, to be unique and irreplaceable is the antithesis of what it means to be a commodity. So the commodification of life is equivalent to denying the sacredness or sanctification of life. Commodity is inherently fungible or interchangeable with other commodities. Commodity is a product, an objectified entity resulting from human labor. And it begets its value only through the process of production or cultivation through human hands. The commodification process leads to a view in which biotic life and ecosystems are solely viewed as commodities or only valued instrumentally. We seek to extract their value, or we deny them their irreplaceability and uniqueness. So the idea here is that biotic life and ecosystems cannot simultaneously be commodified, thereby being valued only instrumentally and sincerely respected as sanctified or being intrinsically valued. And this leads me to a critique of the neoclassical economic system, which is perpetuating the commodification of all sorts of life and lies at the core, the foundation of much of our ecological crisis. From the Christian ethical point of view, two basic postulates that are inherent within neoclassical economics and speak to our collective sinfulness are the non-satiety of consumer desire and the unlimited aggregate growth of commodity production to meet the demand of these perpetually unsatiated desires. The first principle embodies collective gluttony and promotes perpetually furthering collective gluttonous behavior. Our societal consumption habits have gone well beyond satiety levels to resource and energy depletion and waste. And the second one embodies collective greed, which then perpetually furthers more greed, this insatiable appetite for material excessiveness. And they create a cyclical loop in which they reinforce one another in cycles of vice. Another vice that emerges from this is that this becomes imprudent because we cannot have flourishing when we're depleting our resources. So, repentance for these ecological sins, metanoia, entails a fervent change of mind and a radical transformation of our lifestyles. In order to overcome our environmental or ecological sins, we must undergo both self-transfiguration of our dispositions and our habits through ascetic work, through ascesis, these spiritual exercises. But these sorts of things, like fasting and developing the virtues on a personal level, must be accompanied by a societal transformation. And this is why I bring up the socioeconomic order, because orthodoxia entails orthopraxis. Correct beliefs and right practice must mutually reinforce one another and be incarnate and embodied in a correct lifestyle and correct livelihood. We must come to view the purpose of the economy not as maximizing material excess or furthering exponential material growth, which leads to us devouring our ecosystems and harming future generations as well as ourselves at this point, but that the purpose of the economy is the well-being of our earthly home, and it is to help us achieve flourishing. The idea here is that perpetual material growth is actually at odds with human flourishing. It's unsustainable. The constant need for new raw physical material inputs into the system makes it excessive and imprudent. It leads to the destruction and perpetual destruction of ecosystems and harm to the human communities and other species dwelling within them. Numerous empirical studies from economics, psychology, sociology demonstrate that human well-being and even self-reported happiness levels do not increase with increased GDP after a certain sufficiency threshold has been met. The sufficiency threshold is usually placed at certain basic needs. And slightly beyond that, yes, rise in GDP, gross domestic product, rise in material growth does improve until a certain point. But beyond that point, even our self-reported happiness levels do not increase. We lose leisure time, we lose ability to live in healthy environments, we lose time to spend with our loved ones, engage in worship and prayer. So what are we doing? What is the core attitude that we need to adopt? Well, from an Orthodox Christian perspective, we need to embody the Eucharist. And the Eucharist can't be written off as a once a week affair and just simply looked at as a ritual. It is an ethos, an attitude of gratitude. Eucharistia means thanksgiving. And we need to be grateful for creation. We must not take the natural environment and our resources for granted and be grateful for nature and recognize our dependence on the natural world. In these ways, we can begin to reform the ways in which we are enacting our ecological sin collectively by beginning to view consumption as a life-affirming act, being appreciative of the living energies and living systems that make human life and flourishing possible by seeking to replenish ecological vitality in our economic activities, in our consumption activities, rather than simply destructively devour natural creation as we avail ourselves of its many fruits.
Excuse me, Chris, you've got 2 more minutes.
All wrapping up. What do I mean by having an attitude of gratitude or a Eucharistic ethos? Is recognizing a natural diaconia, natural service. We often speak in the Christian tradition of diaconia, going to serve and minister to the needs of the other. Nature here ministers to our needs, providing us with food, water, air, all of these sorts of ecosystem services, photosynthesis. Even our medicines often come from rainforests, even when we synthetically biomimic or imitate them and mass produce them later on. We need the natural world, and to see it, ecosystem services, as being vital to our flourishing really opens up our eyes for ways in which we can embody a more Eucharistic ethos. Very quickly, Gregory of Sinai spoke on different levels of consumption: self-control, sufficiency, and satiety. Sufficiency was this, which I argue is a societal or lay ideal, right? To where we achieve economic stability and ecological sustainability. Satiety was the limit point beyond which we go into gluttony. And really, we're at that limit point, and arguably breaching it now with our current system, because we haven't adopted an attitude of gratitude. Going beyond the satiety limit, as we see, is inherently part of the neoclassical paradigm of economics. So in order to embody this Eucharistic ethos, to think about collectively having self-control, sufficiency, and satiety levels, the middle one, sufficiency, as our goal, and satiety as our limit point beyond which we should not go, and which we are now going. So we must reel it back. And to end my talk here, we can begin to do these things not only on a personal level and collectively embody the tradition of the virtues, a Eucharistic ethos, but starting to look at stable state economics, looking to recognize that there are biospheric limitations to perpetual growth, to begin to balance our inputs and our outputs, our resources and our waste. Nothing else in nature creates waste that isn't something that can be consumed by other species or other microorganisms. We create waste that cannot be utilized by other life forms. We can start recognizing satiety limits and build them into our economic models. Start practicing and encouraging regenerative forms of agriculture that don't just destructively devour landscapes. And we can immediately begin by replacing gross domestic product with a genuine flourishing indicator, or what some call a genuine progress indicator, which acknowledges qualitative factors that we seek, like environmental health, low crime rates, personal health and well-being, and we measure our prosperity and economic and success looking at both quantitative and qualitative factors. These are just some things that are already in existence that I believe eco-theologians from the Christian tradition, as well as others, should start embracing and encouraging and exploring ways in which we can bring these into dialogue with our belief in the sanctity of creation. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Chris. Thank you very much for your presentation. And I look forward to maybe some questions after we have our last presentation, because the questions will be given at the end, okay? So our last presentation is Professor Maria van Duwen, Facing the World's Shadow in Relation to Climate Change and Economic Injustice. Are you there, Marika?
Yes, I'm here.
Oh,
Thank you.
Hi, nice to see you.
Nice to see you all. Yes. Dear friends, I'm really happy I can take part in this conference digitally. I'm really sorry I couldn't make it in person. I would like to thank the leadership of the conference for organizing it, and I'd like to thank the OAC for making this digital participation possible. What I could do, I can share my screen, then you will see my article. I don't have a PowerPoint presentation, but what I can do is this. Let me see what happens. Is this working?
Yes. Yes.
You see my article?
Yes,
good.
It is.
Then you can read with me. That could be interesting, perhaps. I have to do it like this. Yes. So just a brief introduction. I'm a Dutch Mennonite and I am a member of the climate working group of the World Council of Churches. And I followed a 4-year training in Jungian depth psychology. And for a number of years now, I've been trying to combine Jungian insights with the problems we have in environmental issues, especially climate change. Recently, we had the 11th Assembly of the World Council of Churches in Germany, and much attention was paid to the climate crisis there. But it hopefully will not end with words alone, because it's time the churches worldwide finally stand up for climate justice. We have been talking about that, but it's difficult to actually do it. Because to do it meaningfully, we have to look inside first. And in Jungian depth psychology, this is called doing shadow work. I will tell a little bit more about shadow work later. Currently, we are in the midst of 2 geopolitical realities, as you all know. We are confronted with an increasing number of wars and deep-rooted conflicts: Russia, Ukraine, Yemen, Israel, Palestine, to name a few. And on the other hand, the climate crisis can no longer be ignored and hangs above our heads like a sword of Damocles. This climate crisis is discussed annually during the climate negotiations of the UN, in which almost all countries participate. The next COP, number 27, will take place in a few weeks' time, or less than a few weeks even. Although the participating countries in these COPs don't agree on much, they do agree on this. International cooperation is an absolute requirement, a conditio sine qua non, to tackle the climate crisis adequately. The first and foremost aim of these climate negotiations is to ensure just that, despite the ongoing tensions between countries who cause and caused the climate crisis and victim countries. Everyone is aware that we only have a few years left to slow down the climate crisis. But this so necessary cooperation is now under dangerous pressure. We are not only dealing with a renewed East-West crisis, which is apparent in the Ukraine war and in the increasing tensions between the USA and China. Also, the gap between North and South is manifesting itself more and more. Victims of the climate crisis no longer remain silent and demand justice. International meetings, such as the UN climate conferences and the assembly of the WCC, the World Council of Churches, act as an eye-opener in this respect. A few examples of international economic and ecological injustices, just a few examples. Parents in the Philippines who have to sell one of their children as a sex object in exchange for food, because their land has been claimed by Western companies which set up large monoplantations. After all, we in the Western world want a nice smelling shampoo based on palm oil. African families fleeing their homes because of the recent months of extreme drought, like in Kenya and the Horn of Africa, leaving them without water and food. Many have already died. The European media tell us very little about it. After all, we should not be distracted from our consumption patterns in order to enrich already terribly rich shareholders a little bit more. Unfortunately, these examples are not fictitious, but they are facts reported by witnesses participating in the WCC assembly. Reports and exchanges like this are inspiring, but also very confronting. As a white woman from a rich country, I nowadays come prepared. Although I enjoy very much the encounters and conversations with other participants, I also constantly feel a harrowing shame. Shame about the situation now and shame about the past. Colonialism, slavery, exploitation, despoilment of raw materials, art and valuables, contempt for indigenous populations and their customs. We in the West tend to think that all that is a thing of the past, but is it really? Our prosperity is still based on a thoroughly unjust international financial economic system, which causes huge debt problems and climate-related poverty in developing countries, widespread destruction among people, animals, and nature. The climate crisis is a sign on the wall in that respect. Fortunately, a turning point seems to be around the corner. More and more conversations in the West focus on the colonial past and the need to finally make official apologies for the era of slavery. Also, little by little, stolen art is given back to the countries of origin. And just a few months ago, Pope Francis visited Alaska, apologizing for the horrors the Roman Catholic Church has inflicted upon the indigenous population there. Indeed, not only national government and businesses, also churches have caused a lot of misery worldwide, and certainly not only the Roman Catholic Church. Apologies are important and necessary, but not enough. Apologies are only sufficient if a crime has taken place in the past, has been compensated for, and is closed by mutual consent. But the question is, have the economic and ecological injustices of the past really come to an end? We as Christians are called to bring to light and to tackle injustices in the here and now. In doing so, we can no longer deny that many of the current injustices stem from earlier systems which have not yet been dismantled. We must develop truthful insight. Which mechanisms from the past still play a role? What was and is our role as Christians, as churches? What was and is our role as Westerners or non-Westerners? Now I come to the shadow work. Gaining such insight on the basis of introspection and analysis is what Carl Gustav Jung calls doing shadow work. The shadow is the suppressed part of the human psyche, which contains elements that we don't like and we don't want to be aware of. But through training, we can become aware of the shadow's content, upon which we can face and transform the unpleasant elements. Often these elements are rooted in historical injustices. For example, think of someone who has been abused as a child, which is bothering him or her throughout his or her entire life. We know that only if and when the trauma is worked through, healing can start to develop. Shadow work now is not just effective for victims, but also for perpetrators. They too have a shadow in which the committed crime is stored. Also for him or her, healing can occur if the crime and its root causes are made aware and transformed. The shadow model is applicable to larger groups, even to the world as a whole. The footnote refers to Murray Stein, who is a well-known Jungian who mentioned the world's shadow as a first. So if we face the world shadow, we will irrevocably end up with the aforementioned colonial injustices from the past and with the more recent injustices of the climate crisis. Both forms of injustice know perpetrators and victims. We in the North are unfortunately part of the perpetrators. Not personally, perhaps, at least not for the injustices of the past, but we do bear the collective historical responsibility. Most people in the South belong to the group of the victims, both historically and in the present day. Given the current discussions about colonialism, slavery, and the climate crisis, it seems the world is slowly becoming aware of this. But collective introspection should not end there. Real shadow work also means working on transformation. In other words, creating a new reality through awareness, shame, and repentance over historic and current injustices, recognizing and acknowledging their connection while building on a new vision. In this process, it's pivotal that the rich part of the world doesn't linger in a state of shame or repentance, and the other part in a victim role. We have to get out of that pitfall together as a world community. But first, we need to go our own introspective ways. The introspective path of white people in rich countries will inescapably demonstrate that we continue to live in a white supremacy world. After all, we still think, although we're often unaware of it, that our white culture is superior, that it has developed far beyond indigenous cultures, and that our economic system works best and therefore should apply to everyone, even if that leads to climate change, loss of biodiversity, health problems, and untenable debts in countries that suffer increasingly because of the climate crisis. Instead, we should become more modest, step back, question our systems, and learn to learn from other cultures. On the other hand, for less economically developed, oppressed, or marginalized populations, it's high time to reappreciate and regain identities and cultures and to blossom again. It's high time to teach the world their insights and expertise about how to live and work with the earth, with nature, water, air, human health. And perhaps the most important thing, teach us how to heal ourselves, to be part of a community, and especially how to share. The great crisis of our time, the climate crisis of which is undoubtedly the most pressing, offer us a unique opportunity, in addition to bitter necessity, to heal the world. When we fully realize that there is only one earth on which we all have to live together, we will begin to understand that there is only one way forward, namely the way of cooperation and sharing, mutual exchange and learning, of dismantling white supremacy mechanisms while developing other, better ways to live together. In this process, right-wing and left-wing politics, which stand respectively for the interests of the individual and the collective, need to merge upon the awareness that these interests are not mutually exclusive, but are both necessary and in essence one and the same. Only then can we find room to organize our world, including the global economy, differently, namely aimed at the well-being of all, including future generations and nature as a whole, rather than at the wallet of a few. We, rich white people, will then finally learn to share our enormous prosperity and technology with the world, thus considerably reducing global poverty and therefore the risk of wars and conflicts, which we are witnessing today. As such, an upward spiral can be set in motion. Arms races can be slowed down, releasing a lot of assets for the necessary reforms everywhere. At the same time, disregarded populations and cultures can finally reclaim their entitled equivalent place while offering the world their invaluable insights, knowledge, and expertise. In this way—
Excuse me, Marika. Marika, 2 more minutes. Excuse me, 2 more minutes.
I can wrap up in 2. In this way, a sound economic and ecological amalgam optimum by merging different cultures can be developed, containing the best elements of all different traditions and cultures. Many people are already familiar with this. After all, a huge part of humankind has its roots in 2 or more cultures, traditions, and/or religions. This process, I believe, is true globalization. To Christians, this vision should not appear strange. After all, we are followers of Christ and part of a world religion. Therefore, we are called to answer to the needs of our brothers and sisters in all corners of the world. All the more reason for the Christian world community, and of course all others of goodwill, to embrace shadow work, to invest in the urgently needed economical and social transformation, whereby war in whatever form is condemned and prevented as much as possible. Let us speak out against investments in weaponry and weapon trades, against the financial economic system that astronomically enriches a few while condemning many others to their demise, against a system based on a mentality of superiority that sees our earth as possession and gradually destroys it, and above all, act accordingly. We Christians, we believe that we have moral authority. Now the time has come to prove it. Let us pick up the challenges of our time as a renewed interpretation of the covenant God has offered us. I thank you very much. Here are a couple of footnotes in case you missed them.
Thank you very much, Marika. It was very nice to hear you and listen to your presentation. So we have a few minutes before we'll close. And so I would like to ask anyone from the floor if they have any questions or comments to or for Dr. Faiz Jaffer on his existence-centric approach presentation, to Dr. Mahabeen for the prayer of the planet, the environmental ethics, maybe some comments to Professor Chris or to Professor Marika from the Netherlands. If you'd like, you can come up here and say a comment or ask questions. Just give me a minute. They got to become brave. Yes, the other presentations as well. My apologies. Are there any questions or comments? Because if not, then I'll say something. Okay, so I'll say something. Maria, this is what I wanted to say. When I listened very carefully to your presentation, I felt that the concept of colonization of the Christian church was something that needs to be more nuanced and carefully presented when we are talking to people from the Christian point of view. And I say that as a woman coming from the Ukrainian church. Our church has been in the former recent history under the former Soviet Union. Eastern churches suffered terribly under that 70-year reign of hell. 20 million people were killed in the former Soviet Union for their faith. I also know that the relations between the Christian churches and Islam at times, in Turkey, for instance, were very, very difficult, to the point that they did not have a chance to colonize the way some of the Western churches did. So what I ask is that you understand that in Ukraine, as we see what's going on right now, how it's just being slaughtered, considers itself a church of the martyrs, very similar to the church of the martyrs in the early Christian history. We are not a colonizing church in the Eastern Church. The other thing I wanted to say was that it's very important to remember that when we bring out the indigenous populations or the Blacks or whatever it is, that we keep a universal vision, a vision that the abuse of power is a universal problem found not only with white people. In my many travels of the world, and I have almost traveled 100 countries in my years, I have seen what the Japanese have done in World War II. I have seen how the Chinese behave. I have been in the Arab countries, and I see how they treat Bangladeshi. It's very important that as academics who have the tendency to be left-brained and very focused, have a universal problem understanding that the power, the misuse of power is a universal problem, and it is not only white people. Sorry that I challenged you so much.
No.
On
If
this
I may
thing,
answer,
I want to broaden us on it.
If I may answer to that, can I respond?
Of course.
Yeah, Lesia, of course you are right. I mean, I can only say yes and amen to that. But in the span of 15 minutes, it's impossible to be nuanced. That I will do in my longer article. So, of course, you're right. I understand the nuances.
Thank you. Thank you. Anyone else would like to say something? Lucas, come on up. I think if you talk in the mic, I don't know. Can you hear Lucas from the floor? No, I don't think so.
I have a small comment, and first of all, I would like to thank you all. And what I'm thinking now is, after the presentations of our colleagues from the Muslim perspective, and also the Orthodox perspective and the Maimonides perspective, we have all the same feeling that the human behavior was and is still the problem and harming the creation. And I would like to make a little bit further a discussion on the problem that nowadays another problem is also the alienation of human being from God. So human being is trying to take the place of God, and instead of dominating the creation, human being is trying, as you all understand from the fourth industrial revolution, we are now trying to create the world, and we are sure that we can create, for instance, robots who will be have the intelligence of human being and will be also like human being itself. So the creation is becoming a commodity, and even less than that, something that human beings think that they can create. I would like to your comments from the Muslim and Orthodox and Maimonides perspective, just very quickly, if you can, if we have time.
Yeah, we've got a couple of minutes. Anyone would like to comment?
I'll comment if no one else is going to jump in. I think
okay, Chris.
I think that's a very important point. I tried to highlight the idea of, the sanctity of the created order, as when we fail to see the world as sanctified, right? As having this deep value. And for me as an Orthodox Christian, right, it is the omnipresence of the divine. Then it leads to, beyond just the commodification of nature, the idea that we can create nature, right? We become gods, right? We start worshiping ourselves. And I think that's part of the anthropocentrism I was speaking about. And I think that whether or not you're a Christian or from another faith tradition, right? That comment is exactly on point, because we then see ourselves as being able to create, right, nature or recreate nature, rather than engage in a regenerative and cooperative relationship with our co-creatures, right? We need to focus on our co-creaturehood with the rest of the created world and acknowledge, you know, that we are not the ones that can replicate this, right? Once we think we can create nature, we don't see ourselves being able to learn from nature anymore, and learn from the divine wisdom that is in nature. So I think that's a great point that Professor Andrianos mentioned.
Thanks so much, Chris. I'm wondering if I can quickly chime in and just add one more sentiment, is that some aspects of this industrial revolution are also sort of arguing for sustainability and ecological justice. I'm only going to allude to a recent article that I participated in. It's an academic blog on Patheos, and they were looking at the no-kill meat dietary options. So again, it involves a technology where a small cell is extracted from a living animal, and then it's sort of grown in a laboratory until it becomes a piece of meat or flesh, and then that is sort of offered for consumption. So I think there are both ways of looking at this industrial revolution. On the one side of the coin, it has actually provoked many of these ideas that we have from a theological and doctrinal aspect, but at the same time, it is also claiming that it can offer sustainability and ecological justice. So just wanted to sort of balance that formula. Thank you so much.
Okay, so I wanted to take this opportunity really to thank Father Abate from the Ethiopian Orthodox Church, Professor Chris, the Orthodox presenter, Professor Marika, thank you so much about your wonderful presentation. Mahabeen from the United States, California, and Dr. Faiz on continuing this existence-centric approach. I wanted to thank each of you for coming and being with us. It is 8 o'clock right now in Crete, and we are called for a dinner. So I'm going to have to close this all, but thank you once again for coming, and hopefully next time we'll see you face to face. Okay? Thank you so much. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you and bon appetit.
Thank you.
Chris. So a small announcement about tomorrow before you leave. So tomorrow morning at 8:30, it will be an interfaith pray. So please be at 8:30 here at the reception. Lucas will be around and we'll go to the small chapel of St. Kyrios and Methodios, which is downstairs. Okay, so 8:30 here to the reception for the interfaith prayer. And after that, at 9:15 sharp, we have to go to the monastery of Gonia. Okay, which is the monastery. We'll just walk a bit. After that, we will join